Welcome to Highside, Lowside, your favorite motorcycle podcast. This is season 9, episode 8. Zach and I will be joined today by Ari Henning as we talk about motorcycle rider aids. Are they ruining the motorcycling experience? Also, gift ideas for the motorcyclists on your list this holiday season, as well as should you take your Harley Davidson to a track day? We're going to answer all that and much more. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Quick shout out to the biggest supporter of Highside Lowside, that's Motul. Now, maybe you're thinking, gosh, I'd love to help out Zach and Spurge, but I'm not into motorcycles yet. I spend too much time with my nitromethane burning radio-controlled car or helicopter. Well, we've got great news. In addition to oil for full-size vehicles, Motul makes micro premix oil specifically for alcohol-fueled small displacement two-stroke engine. Are you surprised? Don't be. Head over to RevZilla.com/Motul to learn more about all of Motul's products. That's RevZilla.com/MOTUL.
And when you're over there on RevZilla.com, just keep in mind that every time you make a purchase with RevZilla, a little bit of that money goes back into funding the programs that you enjoy. Whether it's Zach and I sitting here talking with you on Highside, Lowside, or the shenanigans that people get into when you're out riding for a CTXP episode, or maybe you just appreciate the gear reviews and the product information. RevZilla gives back to riders because that's who we all are, riders. So keep that in mind next time you need to make a purchase for your motorcycle. From cruisers to sport bikes to adventure bikes and everything in between, we've got you covered at RevZilla.com.
Welcome everybody. Off we go on another Highside, Lowside adventure. We're going to bring our good friend Ari in here in a minute. First though, 'tis the season, Spurjo.
Agreed? I'm wearing my holiday plaid.
You are.
I'm excited for the weather to get a little bit cooler here, at least on the East Coast. It's a balmy 46 degrees outside today. So I'm getting in the spirit. Not gonna lie.
Yeah. I have started adding a layer underneath my jacket to ride to work, so it's getting pretty nippy out here too. Just I'll have you know. Sometimes even dipping.
Are you wearing the Afghan across your lap as you produce
yeah,
this?
exactly.
I know that's
a scooter skirt on. Anyway, it is late in the calendar year as we record this, and that means we'd like to address the looming holiday that is Xmas. And hopefully suggest some gift ideas that would be
or
helpful
any holiday that you choose to celebrate in the month of December. We're
any
not
gifts
just
you decide
any
to give.
gifts.
Yeah,
Yes, this is a gift holiday. So really, what we want to do is we did produce our annual RevZilla holiday gift guide. That is up there. We had lots of different ideas we threw out. I just want to throw out before we start the timer here.
Yes,
what Zach and I are going to do is we're not going to just repeat what we talked about in the holiday gift guide. We're each going to present an additional holiday gift, an extra gift idea.
Maybe
that just
even
comes
3 or 4. Who knows?
Who knows? But if you haven't seen the holiday gift guide yet, it's stuff that we actually use. I'm actually producing today's episode in my home office. My garage is right behind this wall to my right. And so like we talked about like a sag setter. This is something that I actually use. We talked about the Lexan air pump. This is something that I pulled from my garage. So a lot of the times when we're looking at this holiday gift guide, it's stuff that we truly use. And some of it's found at RevZilla. Some of it's not found at RevZilla. But it's stuff that a motorcyclist on your list might appreciate. And it's an authentic representation of what we would like to receive if we were receiving gifts.
Do unto others. So, yeah. Spurjo, let's start the 3-minute timer and run through a couple of quick ideas for gifts to give to the motorcyclist or yourself in your life.
All right. So, Zach, what do you have to start with today?
Okay. I have This is a bit of a weird one. I'm a racing fan. I love watching MotoGP. I would watch World Superbike if I had more time. I'd watch Moto America if I had more time. If you have someone, if it's maybe it's you, if you have someone in your life who seems like they would like to do that kind of thing, a barrier to entry might be the cost of a subscription of one of those programs. You can stream all those championships on the interwebs and it's fun and the coverage is often quite good. I speak for MotoGP. There's like a lot of sessions. There's a lot of like extra content on the site, interviews behind the scenes. There's cool stuff. It's kind of expensive, if I'm being honest. It's like $140 a year or something like that. I don't actually remember. I do it because I'm kind of addicted to it, but some people might not because they're like, I'm not gonna spend the money to do that. But if they did, they would really enjoy it. And it's something that they would use. So that's my first thought for a gift is a subscription to the streaming service that covers the racing that your friend might like or family.
All right. I love it. I'm going to go a little more analog than Zach. My first recommendation is we had Matt Oxley on the podcast a few episodes ago. Matt is re-releasing his book, Stealing Speed.
Indeed.
That should be out in time for the holiday season. So I think Zach's pick is great if you want to go digital. I think supporting Matt Oxley and his efforts, it's a fantastic book. If you liked what we talked about in the podcast with Matt, check out his website. We can throw it in the link below for you, but make sure to get yourself a copy or your loved one a copy of Stealing Speed this holiday season.
And I'll call out that I, a couple of years ago on the RevZilla gift guide, mentioned the Stealing Speed graphic novel, which is not that it's a better gift, but it's more of a coffee table style book. You know, it's basically it's a graphic novel is what it is, if you know what that is. And it's the artwork is great, and tells the story and is a fun way to digest the story if the person you're buying the gift for isn't a big reader. And I that's the copy I have, to be perfectly honest, and I got a real kick out of it. So
yeah, well, you're not a big reader. That's the problem. You like to write the words more than read the words.
Technically literate. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. One other quick one I'll throw out, Spurge. My dad got me these years ago. They're little pads of conductive material with adhesive on them that you wrap underneath your current grips on your motorcycle, and they get warm. They're like, it's a heated grip pack, but it's not like a full set of heated grips that you have to put on your bike. It's like a much sort of more DIY, lower impact heated grip set. And they're like, there you go. There's the timer. Oof. Low impact heated grip set can go on under the grips you already have on your bike. It's like $50. I don't know if we sell it at RevZilla.com. I think my dad got it at Aerostitch.com for what it's worth. But at any rate, I thought that was a nice gift. It doesn't necessarily have to take over the aesthetic of your bike, but it offers heated grips, which are always a good thing on a motorcycle.
Well, the timer went off, but that doesn't stop us usually. So my final pick here is KTM, not to just throw out the KTM, but this is a damn great toolkit. So KTM sells a big and a small toolkit. It's actually relatively affordable for what you get. I'm holding it up right now. You can get this, I believe, on the internet. You can also just walk into your KTM dealer. They do it in a Husky trim too. It's the exact same thing. We actually brought this along on a recent episode of CTXP that we produced. But it's a really comprehensive toolkit. So even if you don't have a KTM, I keep this in the back of my truck. Yeah, I've given it as a gift to some friends.
Have you ever tried to use it on a Triumph or a BMW or a Toyota? Does it work?
It works.
The tools work. The KTM tools that work on other.
It's metric, baby. It just has a KTM orange toolbox.
I don't know if I believe that.
And you can hold it upside down and the stuff doesn't fall out. Look at that. Look at that.
That is impressive.
All right.
Anti-gravity tools. Okay. So
enough of this. Check out over on Common Tread, the 2024 RevZilla Holiday Gift Guide for all of the official recommended gifts from us, your favorite hosts of the podcast this holiday season.
Including one Ari Henning. But today he's not going to be talking about...
And Patrick McHugh and Patrick Garvin. Everybody threw out some recommendations.
Right. Including but not limited to Ari Henning, who is going to join us currently not to talk about gifts, but rather to talk about ABS, traction control, electronic suspension, alternative transmissions, electronic rider aids in general. And if they are a scourge of the motorcycling world or if they are making our community and our culture a better place.
Have they peaked? Have they gone too far? Have they not gone far enough? Do we want more rider aids in our life? That's all of the opinions that you're going to get thrown into your ear holes this episode.
That's right, everybody. Buckle up. Before we do that, let's get Ari in here and kick off the convo.
All right. We are officially joined by Ari Henning. Ari, we shot an episode of the podcast recently where we tried to explain motorcycle terms in layman's technical speak, and we should have had you on for that one, as we're already proving our point.
But layman's terms in technical terms? So you try to complicate them?
We're trying to take technical terms and explain them in layman's terms.
Simplify them, okay. Disseminate information. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. And so we learned our lesson by not having you on for that one. So we're going to have you on to talk about some opinions about where we're at in the state of motorcycle rider aids.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm eager to dive in. Always nice chat with you guys.
Word. So, I think it might be a good idea to start. We're not going to start at the beginning of electronic rider aids and trying to explain every single piece of evolution, but I think anecdotally it might be fun, Ari, to tell us about your first motorcycle, or like the first motorcycle you spent a lot of time on, how, like, if it had any of these things we're going to talk about today, ABS, traction control, electronic suspension, blah, blah, blah. If it had those things, if it didn't, and then maybe you can move into talking about your first experience with those things, your initial contact with these sort of the rider suites that we.
Yeah, I think my first experience was a loaner bike at Motorcyclists magazine before I even worked for them. They just wanted me to put miles on it. It was like a 2007 BMW F800S, as I recall. So that was the parallel twin, the real nasally sport bike they made. That was not particularly sporty, but hey, when you get a free motorcycle from a magazine and you're 22 years old, you're pretty stoked. And it definitely had ABS, which sucked. And I don't think it had TC, but the ABS was like, I mean, you'd engage it and it was these big dramatic pulses. Like you could feel the lever kicking back in your finger. You could feel the bike like freewheeling for a foot. It was very unrefined and unpleasant. And I have a hard time. Maybe if it was like pouring rain, that would be an effective system, but otherwise it seemed pretty crude. And that's, I think BMW is the first to have ABS on a street bike. So, I was not impressed.
So way back when. ABS was the first of the rider aids that you remember experiencing.
Correct. And ABS was definitely the first one to worm its way from the automotive world into the car world. And it has become obviously pretty prevalent this day and age.
Sure.
And then for your first bike, I'm assuming your first bike didn't have any kind of rider aids associated with it?
Oh, no, sir. No, it had carburetors.
It
had a rider aid to start it called a choke lever.
I was gonna say, I guess we're not including fuel injection as a rider aid.
No,
it kind of is.
Yeah, we're talking electronics that assist you in staying safe and or increasing performance, right?
Yeah. And what was your first bike the Honda Ascot, or are you calling your first bike the Bandit?
The old Bandito, the B600, the little Bandit.
Wee Bandit. Bandito. So that was a 4-cylinder, oil-cooled 600, sort of a sport touring-ish kind of a thing.
A less ugly Katana. Yeah. Sport touring. But yeah, no, right. It was carbureted. It was it was an 03 or 06 or something. Yeah. It had nothing. It had no sophistication whatsoever. Right.
So I know we talked about ABS, but like, I think even back before that, like, I know the first real experience that I had was my VFR had linked brakes. Did the Bandit have linked brakes or no?
Bandit had nothing. Bandit was pre-technological revolution. And even if it had been part of the technological revolution, it was too much of an econo bike to have ever incorporated any of that stuff.
Okay.
But the linked brakes, the early linked brakes, likewise, those were kind of hit and miss depending on the manufacturer.
Did you like your VFR linked brake? Your VFR 800 from Honda was a late 90s, late 98?
99.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it had linked brakes. And did you like them? Were they good?
If I'm remembering correctly, it was the front brake would apply a little bit of back brake,
right?
And then the back brake I think operated independently. But I always thought they were great. I thought, and I know that, joking aside, I rave about that bike a lot, but I thought that for a braking system, like shy of ABS, like I thought it was a really solid braking system on that bike.
I mean, adding a little bit of rear brake is a very valid technique, not just for slowing down, but for stability. Like it helps anchor the chassis and actually like squash the rear end a little bit. So it's an effective system as long as it works properly.
Sure. Yeah. We talked a little bit about that in the last pod with Lance. We were talking about, we asked generative AI whether you should only use the front brake, and there was it's a complex answer to that, obviously, that included talking about how the rear brake can really stabilize a bike. So I'm curious about this for you guys. Did you in riding, because Spurge, you're it's kind of the same boat. Your first bike, was your first bike the Bonneville, was right?
Yeah.
Does that have ABS?
No, carburetors.
Okay.
No anything.
Imagine getting a Triumph in 2024 without ABS. Can't be done.
Yeah, I don't think you can.
Imagine getting is there a bike you can get without ABS in 2024?
A dirt bike probably, but that's it.
Yeah,
right?
some of the small entry level bikes.
Yeah,
probably,
I feel like some like Kawasaki does like the whole like it's like a $300 difference.
Yeah, you can get like a
ABS.
Ninja 500 with no ABS.
and it's only
intentionally.
$300. Like it was not that long ago when ABS was $1,000 upgrade.
Yeah, true.
And now it's like in the noise. It's less than a graphics change.
So I'm curious in your early street riding days, or any riding days, I suppose. Did you guys have instances where you locked the brakes on any bike, not just the bikes we talked about, but did you lock the brakes and either fall down or scare yourself or any situation like that? You're nodding.
I had that. I crashed a CBR 600 at Chuck Wall at a press launch and got trapped under the bike and ground a big hole in my leg because I chattered the front. I basically plowed the front over some speed bumps, like going into a corner of trail braking. And we were there and they had CABS bikes, which is the combined ABS that had the whole separate ECU and was like really refined. Right. And then I was like, I'm going to be on a non-ABS bike. And 100%, if I had been on the CABS bike, I would not have crashed in that instance. So
was that the first one that Honda came out with? Was that their first iteration of ABS with that 600?
This was a couple years after that.
Yeah.
The first CABS was like 2012, 2013, I believe.
And that was on the 1000, I think, initially.
Correct. But they brought it all the way down to the CBR 250. And they even had linked brakes on the CBR 250.
Is that a fact? I didn't know that.
And for a while, they disseminated that technology far and wide. And now it doesn't exist anymore, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. And I think it was because it just has been, IMUs have kind of overtaken, like IMUs and algorithms, a bike being able to understand the attitude of the how far it's leaning over and how far it's pitching forward and back has allowed that the more complex system that Honda came up with it was like a little bit obsolete now as far as I can tell. But so that's a good example. Ari, Spurge, do you have an example of like riding in a situation where you you locked the front brake or any of the brakes, like you scared yourself on the brakes because you did not have ABS?
I remember the first time I remember taking the MSF program, and they teach you in MSF, like if you lock up the front brake to let it go. Like if you lock up the front, like let it go. But if you lock up the rear, don't just let it go, because that can actually cause you to then snap it back and then you Highside. So I can distinctly remember the first time I locked up the rear brakes on the Bonneville in a panic situation, and in my mind, I just kept thinking, "Don't let go, don't let go, don't let go, don't let go." And I smeared my way to a red light, and it was a panic brake, and everything was okay. But I looked back, and there was like a trail of rubber. And once it had settled, I was like, "Oh, that's kind of cool." But that's where I remember it. The first time of like actually locking the rear brake up, but there was no.
And you ended up skidding to a stop, basically. Using both brakes, but the front wheel was not locked, obviously. Have you ever locked the front brake, like on the street, like on your Bonneville or something like that? Or maybe not. I hope not. But
I remember
it's a lot harder to do than people think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that was actually where I was going with it. Is sort of like I don't want to get too far ahead. I want to ask that question in a minute, because I have I hate to throw you under the bus, Ari, but I have another memory of a story that you told me. Did you crash your SV?
Yeah, I was just remembering that I crashed 2 other times on the street because of back brake, actually. Yeah, and I can tell those stories now. But it was basically the same thing. Like I like to use the rear brake, very much so on ABS bikes, because you can't do what caused me to crash on my SV650, which was actually lock it up and have the back step out and do the foolish thing, which was release it too quickly and have it snap. And that just distracted me and threw my trajectory off, and I ran off the road and fell down in the dirt. It was no big deal. I did the same thing on a CRF 250L at the press launch, which I have not divulged to anyone publicly until now, because the guy I was riding with told me not to. But it was the same situation. I was basically like, I needed to use rear brake because of the way I was riding, and I overused it and locked it up. But I am a huge proponent of rear brake use on ABS bikes, because it is such a valuable trim tool for your velocity, and also can really have an impact on your trajectory, like using it trail braking into corners. And if you have ABS, there's zero concern about locking the rear tire and having the thing get all swirly on you.
Can you explain, just for people that don't know exactly what you're talking about, can you maybe just give like a little bit more of an explanation when you're talking about like trail braking and how you're using rear brake? Can you kind of just
trim and trajectory specifically? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, trimming your speed, like doing really fine velocity adjustments, again, trail braking. So that's when you're carrying the brake into the corner and still slowing down as you bend the bike over. and you wouldn't historically want to do that with a non-ABS bike because you're losing traction as you're adding lean angle. But with ABS, you've got that electronic like looking out for you basically. And no matter how hard you step on it, it's not going to lock and step out. But a more everyday kind of use is parking lots or intersections. Like I'll use the rear brake a lot because it stabilizes the bike. If you touch the front brake, fork collapses a little bit, your steering geometry changes, weight transfers forward, whereas none of that happens with the rear brake. Riding with a passenger, great time to use the rear brake. Again, you just have to be very cautious if you're doing it on a bike that's non-ABS because it does lock so much easier in the front because it doesn't have weight transfer under the contact patch.
When you guys were doing the episode of CTXP where you were on the police bikes and you're doing the police rodeo, how important was rear brake?
All of it. It was like
it was
clutch,
everything.
throttle, and rear brake was everything. Yeah.
And that was something that the police officer that trained us taught us, like banged into our heads, was like, use the rear brake a lot. And it's partly for stability. As Ari said, it's also like you're already, you're modulating the throttle with your right hand a little bit, depending on the situation. This is outside of police rodeos. And your right hand's already doing something. Your right foot isn't doing anything. So using the rear brake is a good use of, the dexterity of an appendage you have that is otherwise dormant.
Yeah.
And I think
on a Harley, the rear brake is responsible for a larger portion of the braking duties than on a sport bike. And that's because of the weight balance.
Right. And that's why Ari brought up the passenger thing as well. So here's I was going to transition with a story of my own. Ari, you remember we were riding?
Hear about if you've crashed. Oh, I know. I know an anecdote.
I'm probably going to tell the story that you're thinking of. Yeah.
Yep.
So we were riding along a mountain road, and we were on ADV bikes. I was on a big GS. This is 20. Yeah, I was on a 1200 GS. This is in 2012, I think. And we were on adventure bikes. Ari and I were with a friend of ours, and we were looking for a dirt road to turn off of. We're looking for the dirt road, and I was last in the line. It was our buddy was leading, and then Ari, and then I was last. And our friend spotted the road and like slammed on the brakes. And then Ari checked up because he got on the brakes. And then I didn't I was the least prepared of anyone. And I jumped on the brakes and I had the BMW GS in like an off-road mode because we were about to turn onto a dirt road.
And you were on TKC 80s, which are
I was on
tires.
knobbies. When I got on the back brake and swerved a little bit, it locked the rear tire and the bike, I just low-sided and went down and slid off into a ditch, and I slid off into a ditch, and like it was totally fine. But it was a pretty big mistake, and it was because the ABS was switched off. And this is where I wanted to pivot to. Do you think? Oh yeah, do you have a comment, Aaron?
It was also because our ride leader did an absolute jack move.
Brake check.
And brake checked us instead of signaling and being like, we need to turn around. He was just like, oh, we got to stop. And we weren't on comm. So like,
yeah.
You weren't completely at fault, Zach.
I have a clarifying question before you move on. Was it completely off, or did you have it in like off-road ABS mode where it was still on at the front?
Good question.
I think that is a good question. I think that era of GS, you could disable rear ABS, but it was not in an off-road ABS mode. It was like ABS in the rear tire was switched off and ABS on the front was either still on or maybe also off. I don't know. But ABS, this was, 15 years ago now. It was a little bit more cumbersome than less sophisticated.
It was most likely like on or off completely. Because like now normal like off-road ABS mode now, for those of you listening when we're talking about this, allows ABS to remain on in a limited fashion at the front wheel and then completely disabled at the rear wheel.
So brilliant.
It's quite good.
Oh my God. I love it so much.
Which we'll get into in a little bit.
At least on BMWs.
Yeah. Certain brands are particularly good at it. But so I think, and Ari was nice enough to say that I was not completely at fault because we sort of got brake checked by our buddy. But I do think that my reaction in that moment was one of someone who is used to jumping on the back brake on a bike that has ABS, which that bike did. It was just switched off. And so I wasn't as cautious about it. I just kind of like jumped on it and tried to slow down as quick as I could. And it was too much for the knobbies and it was too much for the situation. And I ended up crashing. So I guess I'm interested in pivoting to this sort of point. We've talked about some mistakes that we've made when we did not have ABS. I wonder, Spurgeon, I'm imagining a time when you're a newish rider, you're on your Bonneville, you're riding down a wet road or whatever, or it's at nighttime or something, and that bike does not have ABS and it doesn't have ABS and you're not necessarily an experienced rider. You start slowing down and you're grabbing the front brake and maybe in your head, you're thinking, I want to grab the lever harder, but I'm scared that I'm going to lock the front tire. And I know if that happens, it's very difficult to recover from that.
Yeah.
Do you think that you guys had experiences when you were newer at it or riding bikes that did not have ABS where it was in your head that you did not have ABS and therefore you just felt like you needed to be more cautious, or you couldn't brake in the same way as you have maybe learned to now that you have ABS on bikes, if that makes sense?
I mean, I think it's always like when I'm on a bike that doesn't have ABS, it's something that's still always in my head. Like if I'm on the Bonneville to this day and it's raining outside or it's wet conditions or, you know, I don't ride the same way. And I think it's important to know too, that like and this is kind of like the theme of where I'm hoping that we're going with the episode. Like ABS is a tool. It's not going to just magically prevent, you know, you from crashing. You can still crash with ABS on. But I guess, you know, the very simple answer to your question is that like, even in my early days, I was very mindful of the weather conditions, and the brakes on the Bonneville weren't, you know, knockout brakes to begin with. You really could,
that's fair. Yeah.
You could give a full, you know, bare fist full of brake and you weren't gonna do too much damage to yourself. But it was something that maybe it was just the education through the instructors that I had at the MSF. They kind of beat that into you of like being mindful of your conditions and adjust your riding style appropriately.
Yeah, because not all bikes are going to have ABS, and it's now become fairly ubiquitous, but there was definitely a time when it wasn't.
And I think it's hard for me too, just to jump in with what Ari just said. Like, I think for so long, I was always a proponent of like learning how to ride a bike without ABS first, like learning how to understand, like, you know, because some of the exercises and drills that I've practiced were like coming on the brakes hard enough where you can almost feel like it's going to start to lock up, and then like practicing letting go to like train your brain. And I doubt that that's something that a lot of riders out there that get their first bike that already have ABS, like you're not doing those same kind of mental practices.
Even if you do have ABS, and my dad did this with me when I was learning how to drive when I was a teenager, and I did this with my wife when we got our first car that had ABS, is to go out somewhere safe and mash the freaking brakes and feel what it feels like when ABS kicks in, because otherwise it freaks people out when they actually get in. And also how hard you can brake before ABS is even going to do a thing. But it's a tool. It is a safety measure that you should be familiar with before you actually have to use it in an emergency. Just like you would want to know how to use a defibrillator or something before you had to deploy one in an emergency. Like, not that I know how to, but yeah, I think if you've got ABS, it's worth just like going to a parking lot and seeing how hard you can pull on the front brake before the ABS kicks in.
And you, Ari, we were talking the other day, because, you're working on as we record this, you're working on an episode of the Shop Manual talking about, braking distances and braking technique. And you and I were talking about that experiment that you did years ago with Super Street Bike Magazine, our buddy Sean at Super Street Bike, how you tried to outbrake a generic ABS system on a sport bike, shutting off ABS. Can you stop faster than if ABS is on? Which was a prevalent, I don't want to call it urban legend, but sort
challenge,
of like challenge or theory, for riders, especially when ABS was new. And you just did it on a 2024, model sport naked bike. And you came back from that test saying like, I don't think I can, if the ABS is in the right setting. You were sort of like, it's gotten so good that I don't think I could outbrake it.
The technology has evolved tremendously in the past few years. Like you said, since IMUs have come into play and they can recognize how far the bike is doing, you know, pitching. But yeah, there are a lot of systems historically, if the rear wheel got light and slowed down, it would release front brake pressure. It would not allow you to carry the rear tire or even allow the rear tire to turn at a slower speed. So in the example that Zach's talking about, it was like an 09 ZX6 or something. And as soon as you transferred enough weight to the front that the rear tire got light, it started to pump the lever. And it was easy to outbrake that. But my argument, and as I remember what the upshot of the article was, is that yes, a skilled rider in dry conditions anticipating an emergency brake can outbrake ABS, but that's not how we ride. That's not, you're riding home at Philly at 6 p.m. on a November night when it's dark and starts raining and you go over a manhole cover and then someone pulls out in front of you. Like, are you going to be such a badass that you're like, no, I don't need ABS in that situation? Like the rest of the situation, when it's not dry and you're not prepared for it, ABS is going to do a better job than you can. And nowadays,
and that's when it's most important.
Yeah. And that's when it's most important. And the bike I was on was a 2024 Street Triple RS. And it was just like, I mean, the back tire's off the ground. I can feel the front tires smearing and sliding before ABS kicks in. It's insane. Like, if I was actually managing that mentally, I would be like pretty terrified.
And I think it's important to note. So, for those of you out there that are listening that might not be familiar, if you're at a track day or if you're riding aggressively, I doubt it would happen too often on the street unless you were intentionally doing it. But, if you are aggressively braking into a corner, there are times where the rear wheel can actually be off the ground as you're applying front brake because you're applying that aggressively. So when Ari's talking about the early forms of ABS, what would happen was the sensors would detect that the rear wheel was coming off the ground, wasn't spinning at the same rate, and then would release the brake at the front when actually that's not what you wanted.
Yeah,
so
you're
that's
still
kind
in
of
full control at that point,
Yeah.
but it's too conservative.
So that is kind of one of the last things I'd like to talk about in this sort of section where we're talking about rider aids as they pertain to braking,
As they pertain to slowing down.
Which is, largely, anti-lock brakes is obviously the main umbrella feature there. We're talking about bikes, we've talked about a 2012 BMW GS. We've talked about a 2007 BMW F800 GS. We talked about an 09 ZX6 from Kawasaki. We've talked about old bikes that had maybe less sophisticated anti-lock brake systems. And first of all, those bikes can very much still be on the road and still be for sale. You could still be shopping for one, buying one, riding one, using it. And those systems are still good and also maybe a little bit cumbersome. The state of the art as it stands right now, and I think this is one of the big struggles that I have with discussing, rider safety aids and being binary about it and saying like ABS is good. Because if someone asks me if ABS is good, I say, yes, I think it is good. But it is important to note that there's a huge variety available even on showroom floors in 2024, much less the entire motorcycling culture in 2024 of electronic rider, specifically ABS capability. Some bikes still have fairly cumbersome ABS that is going to feel a little bit strange when it engages. And like Ari said, those are the bikes that would be really beneficial for you to experience that in a dry parking lot when it's safe. So that you know what it feels like when the lever pulses in your hand or when the lever pulses in your foot and how the bike reacts to it. And there are other systems that are fantastically advanced on, high-end sport bikes or high-end adventure bikes that are just really, really even sometimes difficult to perceive how well they're working.
Yeah.
And I think that if there's one takeaway that I want people to take from this discussion, it's that there's such a wide array of capability in electronic rider aids, especially ABS, just like there's a wide variety in performance of motorcycles and skill in riders and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I would say
it's an important distinction.
I think one of the things to like round out this category is like a time, like the first time or a recent time that you remember, ABS saving your ass. Like, is there a distinct memory that either of you have where you're like, oh, ABS saved my bacon right there? I can go first while you think of it.
Go first.
Please do.
I have an example, but it's
no, because in the last episode that I filmed with Zach, I talked about I started riding off road with adventure bikes first. And adventure bikes, I was used to being able to put the bikes into off road ABS mode, where I still had a little bit of extra grip at the front or release at the front. And I talked in the last episode about the first time that I got on a dirt bike. I bought a dirt bike and I put too much front brake on, locked the front brake and crashed. And my buddies laughed at me. But I think for me, the off-road ABS on adventure bikes right now is something that I think is just absolutely phenomenal because you can really come onto the front brake aggressively. It doesn't lock up. You can still lock the rear and slide the rear around if you want to. And so for me, like in the off-road world, off-road ABS is something that I think is just come so far and is top notch. And, Ari, you mentioned the Street Triple RS, and the testing that you did recently. That was the first time at a track day that I remember ABS saving my bacon. I was at NJMP. I was on the backside of the track, and there's like a hard left-hander that's not quite a 180, but it's a pretty aggressive left-hander, and someone had cut in front of me. And it's the same thing you're talking about, like the manhole cover in November in the rain. Like in an ideal track situation, someone's not just, running wide and cutting in front of you. But for me, I was a little bit less experienced in the track and I grabbed a big handful of front brake and I could feel the whole bike kind of come up. and then I just settled into my corner. But I could feel the front ABS kind of pulsing, and in my mind, I'm like, I would have probably panic crashed right there. Exactly.
Yeah.
Sure. What about you guys? Any examples that come to mind for you?
You got one, Zach?
The example I have is not necessarily a save my bacon, but I can remember riding. I think it was you and I, Ari. We were riding big. This is another BMW GS story.
Yeah, my example is a GS story as well.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I remember riding. We were riding down. We were kind of like we were messing around doing some stuff that you probably shouldn't do on 600-pound adventure bikes. And I remember going down off of this sort of like lip. It was sort of like it was an off-road riding area, and there was a big sort of like, I don't know. You could go down this slope that had been driven up and driven down by people in Jeeps and four-wheel drive trucks and whatever. It was wicked chewed up, and it was very steep, and there are these huge kind of like undulations and holes and stuff like that. And I went down it, and I was kind of like feeling it and like, oh, cool, I can just do anything on this bike. And I went down one of these like little pitches, and it was really steep. And I remember grabbing the front brake. I pulled in the clutch and I grabbed the front brake, and I remember thinking like, I'm going to have to focus now. Like it was one of those moments where I'm like, I might be in over my head. This is too much. And as I started going down over this, like down into this sort of gully, it was like a little bit cambered, and I was worried about sliding, and I was worried about locking up the brakes. And I'm like, if I start sliding, I'm going to lose control of the thing. And the front, I felt the ABS in the front start to pulse. And then I could feel and hear the rear tire locking and unlocking and locking and unlocking. I was not touching the rear brake. The brakes were linked, and it was in off-road ABS, and the bike was pressurizing the rear brake, trying to slow me down. I wasn't touching the rear brake lever. It was like, it was doing so much more work than my brain had capacity for in that moment. And maybe I would have survived it with no ABS. Maybe I would have been fine. I don't know. But I remember in that moment thinking like, wow, this is so much better than people think ABS can be. You know, it's doing so much more in this moment than all the people that say like, oh no, it's dangerous. You don't want to have ABS on because it'll just like take control of the bike and you won't have anything. Like I remember just thinking like, without that system, I would have been in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and it's funny because your brain kind of slows down, and you can almost you're like, this is saving me right now. Like I can feel this working.
The BMW system, their off-road ABS is really exceptional, and it is not just a safety benefit. It's actually, in my mind, a performance benefit as well, because
certainly can be.
It allows some slip in the front. But even like Get On Adventure Fest a couple years ago when I was riding around on a 1250, I mean, I just had so much fun ripping down fire roads because you can haze the rear brake and back it in, and you can always add a little bit of front brake to actually scrub speed. And the bike is just so stable and works so well, and it has such refinement over when it allows sliding and how much it allows, that like you can flirt with the edge so much more safely and so much easier, which is a lot of fun to slide a big bike around like that. So it's just knowing that you're not going to fold the front on a 650-pound ADV bike it relieves a lot of pressure. Kudos to BMW for their off-road ABS.
Yeah. We have other stuff we want to talk to. We can circle back to more stuff on this. I think, we'll circle back to a final discussion on these, on some of this stuff later on. I would like to move on to one of the big kahunas, which is traction control. Now, I think, this is sort of, in some ways, this is the yin to the ABS's yang, right? This is controlling traction rather than slowing down, decelerating. Traction control is referring to control of traction when you're accelerating, power being put to the ground. And, it's like, I think practically a very simple system, right? Like if you command the motorcycle to give too much power to the back wheel and it starts to spin or slide, the bike will catch it. But there are so many different ways that motorcycles do this. And again, there's a wide variety of sort of like levels of traction control. But I guess I'd like to start in the same place we started with ABS, which sort of like, I don't know. Is there a situation that either of you can think of when you didn't have ABS and you either wish you did, or in retrospect it would have helped?
Control.
Sorry. Traction control. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Every time I've high-sided.
Do you have a Highside story that that, feels really kind of like egregious and
No,
obvious?
I mean, all my high sides are like lean angle and too much throttle, not like
right,
horsepower. It's like lateral grip biting me in the ass because I'm on a small bike. I remember, I think it was 09 when traction control first, I think it must have been either the 1098 or the 1198 had it. And it was like really specific. Ducati was very specific about what tires you could run. Like you couldn't run to a 200 rear versus a 190 because of the diameters were sensitive to how the system worked. And MV Agusta had the F4R that had traction control as well. And those are some of the first production bikes. And I think you were there, Zach. We rode at Sonoma and you came out. And that was kind of like the first batch of super bikes that you could buy that had traction control.
And RSV4, maybe. I think that was
RSV4.
APRC, first early APRC.
Yeah. And I remember riding with you on the track and we came in and I think it was over the top of turn 2. I left like a big darkie and you're like, is traction control on that thing? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And it worked pretty well. But yeah, that was my first experience. And I do remember riding traction control on versus traction control off. And when traction control was on, you are encouraged perhaps to be more aggressive with the throttle. Right. And it was very eye-opening because it revealed how hard you could get on the gas and how much torture you could put that rear tire under before TC would even kick in. And in my mind, that was a really valuable teaching tool to show you where the line is and that it's a lot farther out than you think it is.
And when you were talking about leaving a big darkie, for people that are listening that might not know, you're talking about, spinning the rear tire coming out of a corner because you're on the throttle that much more aggressively, or you don't?
Yes, spinning is generous. It's smearing really. Like it's turning slightly faster than ground speed. And it's not like, it's not like in the movies where it's just like spinning and pouring smoke, but there is a delta between ground speed and tire speed that does result in some lateral movement and some yaw on the bike, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah. And it certainly grants you, I don't know. I think this is kind of what I was reaching for with the ABS thing. Like, do you brake differently on a non-ABS bike than you do on an ABS bike? And I certainly do. And I think that it's the same thing with traction control. Like I'm a confident enough rider that I will play around with rear traction sometimes, but there are certainly other times when I'm like, I'm not messing with that. I don't have the skill to decide when exactly is too much throttle. But if a bike has a really advanced traction control system, and you're in an environment where it's safe, like a racetrack or something, you certainly feel like, encouraged is a good way to put it. I'm trying to think of the word I'm reaching for here. Like you feel,
you have permission. You have permission to
experiment. You're kind of like, it boosts your confidence like crazy.
And it's a lot less, the repercussions of screwing up on the gas are a lot lower than the repercussions of screwing up on the front brake lever, in my opinion.
Yeah. You certainly you can see it coming a lot sooner. And I know, Spurge, you're a big, off-road and adventure rider, and adventure bike traction control has come a long way from being sort of like a complete hindrance to actually allowing you to have some fun spinning the back tire, without, ruining the ride or like keeping you from climbing the hill you're trying to climb or something like that. I feel like, have you ever used systems that you felt like were particularly bad or particularly good?
I think switching to adventure almost as like a sub bullet point under here is probably something that is worth doing, because I think it's different in the adventure world than it is for the track world. The example that I came to mind for me, really from a street perspective, was the first time that I did California Superbike School. They had us on the first gen of the S1000 RRs, and they start you in rain mode. And if I'm remembering correctly with that bike, rain mode kicks in when you're at a lean angle. So when you were upright, like completely vertical, it was lean angle sensitive. So they would actually, or maybe it was the second gen. Either way, the bikes that we're on would allow like full power when you were upright. And where I remember knowing that traction control was working was you'd be coming around a corner and you'd be on the throttle and you felt like you were going liquid, like just ripping fast, and the bike would come upright, and all of a sudden you'd feel it kind of kick on. And it was an interesting training tool to see before they allowed you out of rain mode, which only limited it to like 150 horsepower. It still wasn't like it was crazy low on the power, but it helped you kind of get a sense of whether or not you were using. Did you have to come out of rain mode? Because if you were coming upright vertical and you still weren't feeling that extra thrust, it was like, well, then you're not using enough power anyway. And it was interesting to me to see how an organization like that almost use it as like a training tool to get people to feel more comfortable, going full stop on the throttle as they were transitioning out of corners.
Yeah. Agreed. I guess I would say, to kind of like, not that we have to end the conversation here, but to round out my thoughts on traction control, I think the big takeaway for me here is that in the state of the art in the world we live in now, I think I feel comfortable bucketing traction control generally into two parcels. One is safety and one is performance. There are bikes out there that will encourage you to ride faster and faster and faster and faster. And allow a little bit more, and a little bit more slip from the rear tire. And then there are bikes that have traction control that is really just designed to keep you from doing anything really stupid or keep you from crashing on that wet manhole cover when you're riding home from work and you didn't see it. Same as the ABS. And I've had experiences with ABS, as we talked about before, where you feel like you're losing control of the bike a little bit because it's so intrusive. I don't feel that way with traction control. I don't think. I always appreciate when you can shut traction control off and have, more fun than it wants you to have. But I struggle to imagine a situation riding around on the road anyway, or in a normal environment, not on the racetrack, not in the dirt, when traction control is a bad thing, when it really sort of like feels dangerous or feels like I can't make the bike do what I want it to do because it's actually that intrusive. Can you guys think of a time?
No, I don't really think that scenario exists. Like on certain ABS systems, it can, because it'll freewheel and you're like, no, I need to be slowing down. Don't release brake pressure. But if you're situations where it's been a hindrance is if you're off-road and you need to spin tire to get up a hill and it's cutting power and you're just losing momentum, which is terrible. Right. And then on the street, the only time it ever flummoxes me is if I'm like trying to do a wheelie or something and it hacks power once the front wheel comes off the ground and you're like, damn it, I forgot to turn TC off.
Right.
But
I would say that's just why I wanted to, before we moved on to like the off-road / adventure bike off-road portion of traction control, I think it is a good delineation to like talk about street or track performance before you're talking about adventure stuff. Because as Ari just mentioned, like there are times where traction control when you're off-road can really actually get you into trouble.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that.
I think you touched on this briefly earlier, Zach, but just to remind listeners that there's overarching all of this traction control and ABS, there is the manufacturer's philosophy. And some manufacturers are far more conservative than others. And the reason we're praising BMW is because BMW still has an extremely advanced system, and it also authorizes the rider to utilize that. Whereas some manufacturers, like, I'm not trying to throw Kawasaki or Honda under the bus, but like they're a little more conservative. Their ABS kicks in earlier, their TC kicks in earlier, and it's more intrusive than other systems where they're like, we will trust you. We will trust you to your own fate to some degree. We're there to back you up, but we're not going to get in the way.
Right. One of the things that I really like about, so the KTM 890 that I have has the Rally pack on it, which you can add to any of the 890s, but it allows you to dial in traction control. So you can actually go from like, you can turn it completely off.
It's multi-level. In other words, you can do traction control level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 8 or something.
Up to like 9, I think it is, or something. Yeah. But it's really, for riding off road, it's really sophisticated in the fact that like you can turn it completely off if you want to, but like level 1 is typically where I keep it, because you can get that bike completely sideways and you can be spinning the rear tire and you're wondering to yourself, like, is this even doing anything? But then you turn it off and you're like, oh yeah, it's still doing something, but it doesn't prohibit you from like climbing the hill or getting out of a situation. Whereas the memory that I have is when we were at Get On Adventure Fest in Mojave, and we had the guy with us on the Tiger 900. Right? And he had it in he had it in off-road pro mode, and he was still having trouble getting it up the hill, or he had it in like regular off-road mode. Something and we kicked it over to off-road pro, and then he was able to get up the hill. And what we learned later, because we kind of got into a little debate there too about in off-road pro mode, traction control was still on, and it could still cause problems where it was in a bit too invasive. So it is important for those of you that are going out with a motorcycle, especially in the off-road adventure world, to know exactly what those different tiers of the system do and how to use them.
And
another nuance to the off-road is that some manufacturers, if you stall the bike or turn the bike off, it resets. So like the Africa Twin will do that, and it's infuriating because if you're actually riding off-road, then you have to remember to go into the dash and turn TC off, which if you're on the face of a steep hill trying to get yourself out of trouble is a pain in the butt, whereas other brands, KTM, BMW, will retain the setting even if you turned off the ignition.
If the bike dies, it will not revert. But I'm pretty sure from a safety standard government regulation standpoint that if you turn the key off, at least on my KTM, unless you override it, they sell a dongle that you can plug in and it will override it. But from the factory, most of them will reset if you turn the key off.
Yeah, but that's not like I had wheelie control off on the MT-09 from Yamaha that I was riding the other day, and you can cycle the key and the wheelie control stays off. So it's like, it depends on the system. It depends on the brand. It depends on the...
And again, that's the philosophy of the manufacturer. Some manufacturers are like, liability, we want everything to reset to the safest setting as soon as the key turns off because you might not have remembered. And then other people are like, this person is intelligent. I will trust them to ride this bike.
The thing that really grinds my gears is when they don't interact well with each other. And this is maybe a good pivot to other engine control rider aids that we wanted to touch on briefly. Like I was riding a BMW down the highway the other day on this R129T. I had turned stability control or traction control off for some reason. I don't remember. I tried to do a wheelie, which didn't work out very well. But anyway, it was still off. It was a remnant, and it didn't really matter because that bike doesn't use traction control very often anyway. It wouldn't let me set cruise control because I had traction control off. And I'm like, come on, man. Like what's going to happen? I don't know if I understand like why. And likewise,
if you turn ABS off sometimes, they like
overlap. It won't let you use other pieces of the electronic suite when you've shut one thing off.
The F900 was like that. If you had the F900 in off-road pro mode, it wouldn't allow you to use traction control. Cruise control,
Cruise control, yeah. What if you want to use cruise control at 85 miles an hour on your dirt road as you traverse Alaska? You know, come on, man.
But I think for a lot of people, if you're riding an adventure bike and you're in off-road pro mode and you hop onto the highway for a segment, like I don't want to have to like close the throttle, cycle back onto the road to be able to use cruise control.
Well, speaking of other engine control things, I suppose you could say that, different throttle maps, for example, qualify as electronic rider aids, right? Like you can put it in sport or street or rain, and you can like tune how much, how aggressive, the feel of the throttle is, or how aggressive the bike feels when you open the throttle. And I guess, there isn't much more to talk about there aside from explain what they do, but I'm curious if you guys have thoughts on those. Like, do you like ride modes in general, or like adjustable throttle maps, for example?
I'll go first. I think throttle maps on some bikes make a lot of sense if they've got oodles of power. If it's a supercharged ZH2 or some super bike that makes 150 horsepower plus, then it's nice to be able to tame that down. But it's silly when you get on like a Ninja 500 or some other bike that's like, it's got a sport mode versus a rain mode and it makes 44 horsepower. Like just don't open the throttle that much. Like you don't necessarily need it. So I think it's a bit of a gimmick on some models because people want to see it, but it's not necessary. But overall, I think it can change the dynamic and character of the bike, which I think we get spoiled in Southern California because it's always warm and dry. But if you live in a place where the roads might be more slick or traction might be at a premium, then it is nice to be able to kind of dial in more security as needed.
Yeah.
I liked it.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
With the 1090, that bike actually,
that's your KTM 1090 Adventure, just to be clear.
It's always going to be a KTM. It's going to be a KTM.
That's right.
It's going to be a Triumph.
Stop it. I was going to talk about like Yamaha. I think the throttle maps at sometimes are almost too aggressive. Like there's definitely been some of the Yamahas that I've ridden where like the throttle feels almost unusable. But what I liked, the 1090 didn't just change the throttle feel. If you put it in off-road mode, it actually retarded the horsepower back to, I think, like 100 versus like 125. And it just made it a little bit easier to ride that bike in certain off-road situations where you weren't just spinning the rear tire. It was actually allowing it to be a little bit more usable from a power standpoint. And in that instance, I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah. Word. I feel like I vacillate between being frustrated that there are so many modes, and I'm like, especially when I can't tell the difference, I'll put it in sport mode and I put it in street mode and I put it in urban mode. And I'm like, I don't know. It all like, it sort of feels different. I guess it feels a little different kind of on certain bikes. And then, I get on another bike that has like a sport mode where it just feels like it snaps my head back every time I open the throttle. And then I'm like, Jesus, who wants this crap?
Yeah,
it feels like the manufacturer can't win.
standard versus sport because it is too aggressive.
Yeah, totally.
So my question for you both, as we're kind of rounding out the ride modes, whether it's like a long-term loaner or a bike that you've owned, do you find yourself actually using the different ride modes? Or do you find yourself like finding one and like, this is the one that I like and I'm just going to ride in this? Do you actually use all 4 or 18 ride modes, or do you kind of gravitate towards one?
I think Zach and I both experiment with all of them because we're curious and it's part of our job.
Yeah.
But I'll usually settle into one. And if it's a bike where there's a user mode where you can tailor it to what you want, I'll typically use that. And I think the things I like to adjust are the engine map. So like the throttle response, and I'm more of a standard versus a sport guy. I'd rather open the throttle more than have to be like really tempered with my throttle application. And then ABS, turning that down to allow certain maneuvers that we find fun. And then traction control, turning that down or off to also allow certain maneuvers that we find fun. But we live in a very warm, dry environment. We have lots of traction here in California.
Lots. Yeah, we got traction coming out of
oodles of traction. You guys need traction? Come to SoCal. We'll put some in a box for you.
Yeah, I guess what I was getting at there was like, I even with like the bikes that I've owned that have all these different modes, typically what I do is I find, like, to Ari, to your point, they have usually a setting that's called like rider setting.
Yeah.
And then you can fine tune and like, these are the settings that I want. And then I really don't touch it again.
Yeah. It's kind of like adjusting your handlebar, your levers to where you want them. And then you're like, yeah, that's where they are.
Yeah. Or like, like you can adjust the background of your cell phone, right? And like I'm definitely prone to like I pick a picture that I like, or I pick a background that I like on my cell phone, and then I'm like, I don't know, I just don't touch it for a long time. That's the one that I like, so I don't care. And I feel like that's kind of how it goes. I will give a quick tip of the cap to Ducati. I've always liked that Ducati has a set of parameters. Like it'll be like there's an urban mode and a rain mode and a touring mode and a sport mode. There's 4 modes on your multistrada or whatever. And in each of those modes, you can change it to be whatever you want. So you can like make urban mode have like max power and 0 ABS if you want to. It comes from the factory as like dumbed down power, and but they're all fully adjustable. So you can just make them be whatever you want them to be. And like, well, if I want, this mode to be that, then I can do it. And in your mind, you can be like, well, that's my passenger mode where I have the suspension set to be really soft, and I have the throttle mode dialed way down, and I have, ABS turned way up. Like if it's raining or whatever, I'm just going to use that mode. And I feel like that's the kind of adjustability as an owner that you want, like we've been saying, if you're messing around with it, it's one thing, but like most people are probably going to pick one thing that they like and then stick with it.
So we need to get in a break for an ad from Motul. But before we do that, let's just round out engine control. And I have one question for you guys as it relates to cruise control. So I think we all enjoy electronic cruise control. It's something we've all talked about at one point or another on the podcast and in life. Radar adjustable cruise control. I recently just had a rental car. A little lovable Toyota Corolla, and it had like a radar adjustable cruise control. And I found myself, it was my first time experiencing radar cruise control, and it was weird for me. It was like trusting the car to like adjust based on its perception of the car in front of me. But I know that, I believe, Zach, at least you have ridden one of the new bikes with radar cruise on the motorcycle. What are your feelings on radar cruise control in general? Any quick takes on that?
Yeah, well, a couple things. First of all, this is how far behind motorcycles are from cars, right? A Toyota Corolla has radar cruise, and you got to get like a $30,000 Ducati Multistrada or something to get radar, or BMW or KTM or something to get radar cruise on a motorcycle. And Ari, I think you tested the radar cruise on the Multi that we had, or the Multistrada we had around a couple years ago, I think, didn't you?
Yeah, we had a Pikes Peak last year that had it as well. Yeah, so I'm familiar with it because our family car has it. Right. But if you'd never experienced it before and your first taste was on a motorcycle, it would probably freak you out.
Yeah, definitely. It like by motorcycles that have radar cruise, that some of the safety systems involved with it, like, they have front impact warning and stuff like that, which if you're splitting lanes in California or in any place that it's legal,
freaks out a lot.
It can get a little bit weird. But I do like radar cruise. I am pro. I think it's cool technology that you can, set it at 70 miles an hour. And if the car ahead of you slows down to 55, the bike will slow down. The thing that I think what it offers to motorcycling that is the most valuable is a front impact warning thing. Is like considering how complex and distracting, modern traffic can be, modern vehicles can be. You might be looking down, switching one of these ride modes, and the person ahead of you slams on the brakes. And if you have a bike that has a radar recognition system that sees that and like starts applying the brake, is it going to freak you out? Yeah, maybe. But is it going to keep you from rear-ending that car? Also, maybe. Yes. And I think that's like, I think that there is value there. And I want to circle back to this later. I think there's also danger in like that perceived safety.
Ari, you're kind of shaking your head. Do you have something that you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the system works a lot better in cars because cars are used for commuting. Cars kind of stay in their lane. Cars kind of follow a pretty predictable trajectory and path. Whereas like motorcycles are a lot more dynamic. There's a lot more going on. And I've certainly experienced in that multistrada, it thinking I was going to pack a UPS truck simply because I was changing lanes at a proximity that it did not agree with. And so I think that like, there's a lot of ways, especially in California, as Zach pointed out, where we lane split, where we're in like pretty close within feet to other vehicles that are on the road. And the systems aren't necessarily designed with that in mind. They're not that refined or intelligent. So I don't know. I think I like the cruise control. I think adaptive cruise is great. I don't really use cruise control on motorcycles because I try not to go on long trips on roads where that is a thing I would want to use. I'd rather, if I'm going to ride 500 miles, I want it to be twisty. But I can understand how people would find it appealing.
I think the good news is that it's not the type of technology that I think is just going to like sweep across motorcycling.
No, it's too expensive to integrate.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be on expensive touring bikes. And if you want something without it, it's going to be easy to find.
All right. Well, I think we can come back around, at the end, we'll talk about like, the evolution and do we like it? Do we not like it as some final thoughts here, but let's get into a word from our sponsor, Motul, and then we'll jump into a few more categories of rider aids.
All right, everybody, we're back talking about electronic suites of rider aids on motorcycles. Spurgeon, we're going to pivot into suspension. And I know you love talking about suspension. So I want you to try to keep it
Guest honors.
Steady,
Ari gets to go first. I'm shutting my mouth.
Is there a
I'm going to
prompt?
sit here with my KTM toolkit and I'm going to let Ari talk while I just gaze upon this.
Is it just open format? I just get to riff on electronic suspension, or do you want me to start at the beginning, or what?
Well, I think you could start, yeah, exactly. As our buddy Mark Cook would say, first the earth cooled, then the dinosaurs came, and then electronic suspension. No, so I think the initial conversation around suspension as a rider aid, it's like, sure, any suspension that offers springs and some oil damping on a motorcycle is a rider aid, right? Because it's helping you get down the road.
Yeah, that's a good point. From a very
electronic suspension is what we're talking about, and specifically, adaptive suspension, electronically adjustable suspension. And I think you could, I think you're allowed to riff. But like, does that even count as an electronic rider aid? And how might it affect the ride in a way that someone who hasn't tried it might not expect?
Sure. Well, I would like to start at the beginning, which is the early days of adjustable suspension, which is not what we are familiar with now, the dynamic suspension. Previously, it was similar to ride modes where you could hit a button and it would go from touring to sport, and it would primarily do that with damping. It would open up the damping or close down the damping to firm up the suspension. Whereas the stuff you're talking about now is dynamic and is actually adjusting the flow through the cartridges. On BMW, supposedly doing it 100 times per second, making adjustments. Right. And it does. It can totally transform the character and the dynamic of the bike and how it feels and what it's capable of. As far as it being a rider aid, if it's actually
more
dynamic,
of a luxury.
Yeah, it's definitely a luxury, right? Like a system that as you're getting on the front brakes, it's firming up compression damping on the forks that it doesn't dive as much. Like that's certainly a luxury item. So I don't know if it's a rider aid. If the idea behind rider aids is that, Spurgeon's got stuff to say.
No, I'm being polite. I'm not letting you finish. I was slowly
raising the hand. If it makes a rider aid is something in my mind that makes you safer and or enhances performance. And I would say according to those criteria, then yes, electronically adjustable suspension does fit those criteria.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to agree with that. I think that so many people never touch the manual clickers on their suspension, right? So they get a bike and they, in their mind, they're like, oh, well, the dealership set it up specifically for me. The factory knew that I was weighing in at 220 pounds. My wife was 140 and we were going to go with 30 pounds of luggage. And I can't tell you how many people I've met where it's like, they've just never touched or adjusted their clickers. And for me, an electronic
which is
suspension,
ironic because they might have purchased the bike because it has they're like, oh, it's got adjustable suspension, which is like, that's a quality feature. So I want that. But then they don't touch the
and they don't touch it. But when you think about like now, with BMW comes to mind, but I know so many of these high end manufacturers, KTM and Ducati especially, like you can adjust the preload and you can feel the bike, moving up and down as the preload sets for how many riders you have. When we did the Harley, we talk about the Harley Pan America, they were the first to introduce it, but like adaptive ride height, where the bike will actually lower when you come to a stop. And so it's
that is a rider
because
aid, I would say.
Yeah, you might not miss putting your foot on the ground. Like I think that electronic suspension absolutely from a performance standpoint and from a safety standpoint in 2024 would have to be considered a rider aid.
Okay, there you go. That's a strong opinion. I like it. And I knew that you were going to say suspension was a rider. You just love suspension.
And I like that you bring up the fact that it allows people to experiment. It gives them the freedom to be like, I'm going to push a button and see what it does. And then you actually get to see what difference adjusting your suspension can make. And it's obviously quite convenient to just push a button and have that be the case instead of having to get tools out and turn clickers.
Right. It's an accessibility thing, right? It's a luxury and an accessibility thing. Yeah.
Makes it very accessible.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. I have a memory of riding the 2013, I think it's 2013 Ducati Multistrada 1200S with skyhook suspension, which, it was I guess relatively early in the days of adjustable suspension from Ducati. And I remember thinking you put it in like an urban mode, which is supposed to be sort of like plush and soft and comfortable, and just feeling like the bike was it was like a Cadillac. It was just like really loose and soft. And you'd like I remember riding over these speed bumps through this little city in Spain where we were riding and being like, I'm just hitting these speed bumps and like, it's all just so relaxed. And then when you put it in sport mode, it was just like, felt so rigid. It was crazy. And I guess where I'm going with this is maybe I'm just holding this in my mind's eye and it's not really fair, but I feel like where electronic suspension has gone in my mind is manufacturers always want the bike to be balanced and have a certain amount of poise when it's in a certain mode. When what I appreciated about that bike way back when was that it wasn't balanced or it didn't have any poise in urban mode. The idea was that the suspension was just loose and soft. That's what it was supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to be good at anything else. And I guess I appreciate that. And I wonder if as adjustability and technology has expanded, the fear of like freaking people out by having a suspension mode that's so out of whack that the bike feels strange has like deterred manufacturers from providing those, if that makes sense.
Probably. They always want their motorcycle to seem like it's
right.
It's under control and dialed in.
Right. I don't know. And maybe that's part of a bigger discussion about like, when the Yamaha has slowly refined the MT-09, previously FZ09 in the US market. Because when the FZ09 first came out, it was like extremely rambunctious and the suspension was not very good and the brakes were not very good. And the throttle response was not very good. And as it's gotten quote unquote better, some riders, perhaps me included sometimes, have said, I kind of missed the old one that was just wacky and stupid, and now it's like it has much more conventional riding position. It has more conventional suspension feel, more conventional engine feel. It's still a cool bike, but not the like flamboyant, wacky thing that it was. And I wonder if in the world of rider aids, brands are afraid of that. And I guess I wouldn't blame them.
I think it's refinement. We've seen that across the board, right? Like I think there's probably a couple examples, and for whatever reason, Yamaha does come to mind because when you said FZ, I immediately thought of the FJ09 before they switched it over to the more touring one, because the FJ09 when it first came out, it had the shorter swing arm, was very prone to wheelies. Right. Same thing with the throttle modes. And it's definitely gotten more tame and more refined over time. But I think there's probably other examples of that where, the first generation of some of these motorcycles are probably just a little more rough around the edges. And when you start advancing rider modes, whether those are rider aids, whether that's suspension or it's, engine or it's ABS, everything can tend to feel a bit more neutered at times, and I think that gets back to Ari's point earlier about like, the way that he likes to ride, turning some of that stuff off sometimes is a little bit more fun.
So suspension is a rider aid. I think you're right, Spurgeon. I would like to pivot to something that's certainly an electronic rider aid, but more contentious, I think, which is rider aids in the transmission. So I know, Spurgeon, you and I have arguments about how you don't really like quick shifters, and I do like quick shifters.
Oh, you don't like quick shifters, Spurgeon?
Yeah, I know what's wrong with him, huh?
Do you not like heated grips either?
Yeah, and he doesn't like hot dogs, hamburgers, or apple pie. Throw that at this guy.
Sleeping over the weekend.
You're spiraling here. You're spiraling. I do not.
It makes us question your character. That's all.
That's questionable for other reasons, and you know that. No, I don't like quick shifters off road. I don't like quick shifters for adventure bikes off road, and specifically, I like bikes where you're allowed to turn the quick shifter off, because when the quick shifter is on, even when you're using the clutch and shifting, I do think it affects it sometimes softens the feel of engaging. Whereas I prefer, like if we're on a track, I think a quick shifter is great. If we're riding around the street,
I love a quick shifter. I love a quick shifter.
It's great. I love it. I love it. But my where Zach and I have sometimes gotten into arguments is that I like to turn the quick shifter completely off when I'm riding off road with an adventure bike.
I wouldn't. Yeah, off road's a different story, but on road, and a lot of times it's originally a technology that was for performance, right? It cuts down on the time to shift gears, so you can accelerate more time with the throttle open. But even sport touring bikes have them now, and they're just so much fun to use.
Ari, tell us what a quick. I think we should probably go back to.
Sure.
This
is good.
Ari, what is a quick shifter for the audience that doesn't know what a quick shifter is, and how has it evolved? What does a quick shifter in 2024 mean to you?
Yeah, Ari Henning, I've got a Bandit 600, and I'm already shifting pretty quick. So how could it be quicker?
So standard way to shift a motorcycle is you roll out of the throttle a little bit, you pull the clutch in to unload the transmission, you toe your left foot to move it into a different gear, and then you let the clutch out, and then you get on the gas. That's a lot of different steps, right? What is that, like 5 steps, 6 steps? A quick shifter allows you to shift without using the clutch by simply kicking the shifter. There's a sensor in the linkage that knows that you're trying to shift gears, and it interrupts ignition timing to unload the transmission just long enough for it to shift to the next gear. So you don't even have to close the throttle. So originally, as I said, developed for racing because it allows you to get to the next gear and stay on the power, continue putting torque to the ground. But now they're, again, like ABS, like traction control, they're being offered on just an absurd variety of motorcycles. And I've got opinions about how and when to use them, but similar to heated grips, it's always a nice to have.
And was it with quick shifters originally? Was it only up and not down?
Yes,
correct. Yeah,
because that can work on bikes that don't have ride-by-wire throttle.
Correct. So yeah, and that's, I guess, like they would call that auto blip or bidirectional quick shifter. But historically, yeah, quick shifting was just for going up, and you still had to manually go down. Although plenty of bikes now where it works going up and down.
Yeah. I will say that I've been riding around on this 2024 BMW R12 which is a sort of retro naked roadster from BMW. If you're not familiar, it uses the old oil-cooled engine that left the flagship BMW GS line in 2012, and BMW still uses this engine for sort of this retro roadster bike. It's cool. It's a fun bike. I like it. It has a quick shifter now, and the original one when it first came out in 2014, 15, did not have a quick shifter. The new one does, and I don't think that it's better.
It doesn't work well with that engine.
Exactly, because the engine transmission is like, this is one of the reasons that,
that's why you don't see them on Harleys.
Yeah, exactly. Harley Davidson touring bike or something like that doesn't have a quick shifter. It's not because Harley Davidson doesn't have that technology. It's just because it wouldn't work well in that application. And the BMW R12 is like flirting with that border, I think, in a way. Like I often find myself using the clutch anyway. To your point, Spurge, certain bikes, certain situations, it's like not as pleasing somehow. And I think, if it's okay, if you guys don't mind, that's a good transition into alternative transmissions in general, like Honda dual clutch transmissions, fully automatic transmissions, which we're seeing from KTM and BMW now. And those are certainly.
Can we, before we make that leap, Ari,
sure,
because I feel like this was something that Ari wanted to get into a little bit. I just want to throw back because you're talking about why quick shifters wouldn't work on Harley Davidsons. Ari, You said that you have specific thoughts on how and when a quick shifter could be used. Could you maybe just educate the audience a little bit as to how you feel a quick shifter is best applied?
It wasn't so much that. It's more of a perspective on the detractors of quick shifters. Say that it takes away control and that it teaches bad habits. Mm-hmm. I am certainly a believer in having clutch finesse. There's very few things I enjoy more than a perfectly timed clutchless downshift while leaned over at the racetrack. It is just a very satisfying thing to do. So I like quick shifters a lot because they're exciting, they're exhilarating, and they do function well. But I would hate for someone, I shouldn't, hate's a strong word. I would be disappointed if someone learned how to ride a bike with a quick shifter and never learned how to properly manage a clutch lever.
Well, if that's not a perfect segue into
to not having to shift
DCTs.
at all.
Yeah.
To DCT.
Well, so, I mean, that's certainly a rider aid, right? Would be buying a motorcycle where you don't have a clutch lever and you don't have to use the clutch. And there are a wide variety of motorcycles or two-wheeled vehicles that you could buy that have, like you could buy a scooter that has a continuously variable transmission. You just open the throttle and you're going down the road and you don't have to worry about a clutch. You can also buy a Honda Goldwing that has a 7-speed transmission in there that's doing all the shifting like an automatic or similar to an automatic would in a car. It's certainly a rider aid. You bring this up, Ari, like you don't like the idea necessarily of someone learning to ride a motorcycle without having to manage the clutch. But I guess I'm just to play devil's advocate. What if that person would never ride motorcycles at all? Would you welcome someone into motorcycling if they just never wanted to use a clutch because they could do that and have a fun career?
Hang on. No. Because this is where this is what we're going to get into next, where we're going to talk about our opinions on all of them. I think we're getting excited here, and I think we're jumping into the right or wrong aspect.
Oh, I thought we were at that point I thought we were at section 5, but I misread. Sorry.
Oh, I just meant like I feel like we glossed over automatic transmissions a little bit here, and maybe a little bit more of an education.
I'd rather talk
for the
about
audience.
like slipper clutches or something because I think they're very similar to quick shifters in that
fair enough.
They can teach you bad habits with sloppy downshifts instead of being careful about your rev matching. So
Tell us what a slipper clutch is then. Explain that to us. I think Zach and I tried to explain this about 3 episodes ago, and I don't know if we did a great job. So why don't you?
I don't know if I'm going to do a better
job.
So you can manually slip a clutch by applying a little bit of pressure to the brake lever, right? Like you can allow the clutch plates to slip past each other by taking pressure off of the plates. That's what happens when you pull the clutch lever in. And you can manually re-engage the engine gently with some slip so that your downshift is smooth. A slipper clutch does that for you. It's got little ramps built into it. So as the rear wheel is driving the engine during an aggressive downshift, those ramps press together and they separate the clutch plates a little bit and it's allowed to gently slip. So it smooths the re-engagement of the rear wheel. And on a lot of bikes now, they have it included as a safety feature so that if you are a newer rider and you accidentally downshifted, say 1 more gear than you intended, and you let the clutch out, it's not just going to like cause the rear tire to chirp and chatter and jump all over the place and freak you out and possibly lock up and cause an incident. Originally, it was similar to quick shifters, a performance thing, because in racing, you're getting into a corner so fast and you're condensing all these activities, this braking, this leaning over, this downshifting, that it allowed the bike to stay stable and allowed the downshifts to happen more rapidly and later in the corner. Whereas now it's just sort of turned into kind of a safety feature that can also be a performance feature depending on how you ride. But they are advertised primarily on bikes like whatever, say again, the Ninja 400 or 500 as a safety feature. But if you rely on it, if you're just like constantly dumping the clutch, just throwing the lever out from the bar and letting the slipper clutch make all your downshifts smooth, then you're missing out on, for me personally, what I find really satisfying about riding a motorcycle, which is working in concert with all of these controls to make the thing be smooth and fluid.
And just a clarifying question for you, because if I remember when you started it off, I think you misspoke and said brake lever. When you were talking about learning how to like manually slip the clutch, you're manually using the clutch lever.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep. We've been talking about a lot of stuff. My wires.
I know. No, I just want to make sure that if there is anybody out there listening, that they're clear in how you explain that. Because I thought
they
that
don't
was
just
a great
think I'm
explanation.
stupid. I've never actually ridden a motorcycle before.
Just read a lot of books. So tell me about Spurgeon. Have you ever ridden a automatic transmission motorcycle?
I have. I've ridden most of the automatic transmission motorcycles. I think all the transmission automatic ones have been Honda DCTs.
Okay. Right. Yep. I guess come to think of it, I'm not sure. I don't think any of us have ridden the new BMW has a new system.
KTM
has coming out with systems. I don't think any of us have tried those yet.
Aprilia had one back in the day.
Yeah, that's right. Was it the Mana?
The
Mana
750?
Yeah.
850,
It wasn't very good.
Like
Yeah.
Did you tried it?
Yeah. I remember riding it in downtown LA for a photo shoot.
What kind of automatic transmission was it? Was it a dual clutch style thing? Like whatever.
Yeah, I honestly
the
can't
sort of
remember.
Honda
I'd have to look it up. I don't remember. I thought they had a big engine CVT.
I think it was. We had someone working at RevZilla in the early days. I'm pretty sure it was a big engine CVT.
I think it was.
It almost was like a big.
Twist and go.
It was like a big scooter type version.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe we should use that for our scooter superbike.
There you go.
But like the Hondas is cool. Like it works well. They've evolved it, from first generation to I think they're on the third or fourth generation of DCT now. You can put it in full auto mode and just ride, or you can do the paddle shifters and paddle yourself through. I found it was, I don't want to say boring. Like if you're somebody that doesn't want to learn how to, use a clutch, it worked is what I would say.
Yeah. We also just, in fact, we might still have it in the shop right now, Ari, that Honda CBR 650, which is
I'm looking at it.
A little, it's a 4-cylinder, mid-sized sort of sporty bike. And Honda has this new e-clutch system, which some of you listening might have read about or watched a video on or something like that. But you might be best equipped to describe what it does, Ari, rather than a dual clutch transmission, which is sort of all, uses twin clutches inside the engine to shift gears.
And twin clutches and an ECU. It's a very complicated system. The e-clutch,
whereas the e-clutch is,
it still uses servos and it's still connected to the ECU, but it basically just manually operates the clutch for you. And it is refined enough that it can basically integrate with the way you're riding and not interrupt. But it's little electric motors that more or less pull the clutch lever for you, but they do it down at the engine where what you're doing with the lever actually affects the clutch.
So is there no clutch lever at all on that bike?
There is a clutch lever, which is fascinating.
And it's fully functional.
But if you choose not to use it, you can just shift through the gears.
Correct. You can be in neutral to turn the bike on and just click it into first gear, and it will very, very quickly push the clutch in to disengage it as it's going into first gear. And as you roll the throttle open, it will gently engage the clutch and you will be away.
So wait, so you can push it into first gear, not touch the clutch, and it's not going to just stall the bike or jump on you. You'll allow it to. But you have to but you then have to manually shift from there. It won't.
Correct. You still have to use your left foot to shift through the gears, but you do not have to use the clutch unless you choose to. It's similar to a Recluse in some ways.
I was going to ask you, because I've used a Recluse before, but I've not used the Honda system.
And it's odd because it does not. It never manually shifts for you.
Correct.
It only takes over control of the clutch, pulling in the clutch when you come to a stop, or as you accelerate away from a stop, using the clutch to just gently engage as you would. So you can have it in fifth gear and then roll up to a stoplight and just pull the brake and come to a stop. And then the dash will start blinking and be like, hey,
please don't.
Yeah, please don't accelerate from this stop in fifth gear. Go down to, push down with your foot so that it goes down to first gear or second gear or whatever.
But the DCT will. The DCT automatically just
the DCT is fully automatic. Yeah. It'll those systems that are on, Honda Goldwings, Africa Twins, and NCs, stuff like that. That's fully automatic. So the e-clutch thing is very interesting. And I only rode it for a short period, but what I thought was so fascinating about the e-clutch is that if you don't have to use the clutch lever. You don't have to touch the clutch lever. As Ari said, you can just not touch it and the bike will do everything for you. But if you just gently lay your hand on the clutch lever, you can feel the system working. You can basically, the lever will start pushing on your fingers basically and moving around as it needs to engage the clutch or disengage the clutch. And to me, it reminded me so much of when I learned to ride a dirt bike. I was 8 years old or something like that. And I remember my dad sat behind me on the seat and he put his hand over my hand and he pulled in the clutch and then he added the throttle. So he basically just put his hands over mine. And then he showed me how to engage a clutch by twisting the grip and by gently releasing the lever. And when I ride that bike, I was getting flashes of that because you can basically just have the computer teach you how to use a clutch in some ways. You can feel what the computer is doing and not have to actually be responsible for any of it yourself, which I thought was kind of fascinating.
Yeah. You could just be along for the ride.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I think you pointed this out, Ari, when we were talking about it. It's a lot cheaper to institute on a motorcycle. It's like a lot less hardware.
So much simpler.
Yeah.
The DCT is a very complicated system, and this is still complicated in the grand scheme of things, but much less so than DCT.
Do you think that the e-clutch system could then be that barrier, or could it eliminate the barrier for entry for people that are like, man, I really want to ride a motorcycle, but I don't want to use a clutch. I like the idea of using a clutch, but it scares me, right? And is it sophisticated enough where you feel like somebody would have an easier time hopping on and learning how to ride the motorcycle versus truly having to understand, having to, clutch control and all those things that you romanticized earlier, Ari?
Yeah. I mean, like Zach said, you could own that bike and ride it every day and never touch the clutch lever if you preferred to do it that way. I mean, you could take the clutch lever off if you wanted and just like let it do its thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder.
Honda's certainly banking on it attracting more people, right? They've done well with DCT.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what I was going to say. A couple things. One, Honda deserves a lot of credit for putting all the research and development dollars it took to develop DCT and turn it into something that can be sold for an upcharge that is not particularly significant considering how complex that technology is. And also, basically, Honda is the one that's undercutting itself by being like, we designed this new system.
Making DCT obsolete. It does everything DCT does, but it's a much simpler system that weighs less and costs less.
And I think our buddy Dustin, very popular, right? I mean, like I know when they were talking about like the models of Goldwings that they're selling, I think it's something like 50% of them.
Half of them are DCT.
Yeah, which is impressive. And I think didn't Dustin tell us, Ari, that that Honda CBR 650Rs and Honda CB 650Rs
they're
are only being sold with e-clutches.
Correct.
So it's standard. You get an e-clutch if you buy that bike, and you don't have to use it if you don't want to, but it's on there.
Yep.
Which is interesting.
And that's our colleague Dustin Whelan over on RevZilla's Common Tread.
Knower of things.
You guys had Dustin on the show yet?
Not yet.
No.
That's a good call out.
Smart guy.
So,
I think we're
am I allowed to ask the hard-hitting questions now?
I think it's time.
It's time. Okay.
Yeah.
Ari, that person. Well, Spurs, you sort of asked this question too. It's sort of like if someone was interested in riding motorcycles, but they didn't want a clutch. They don't want to learn how to use a clutch. Would you be welcoming but saddened, or would you rather they not even bother with motorcycles? Because part of the joy and passion and I don't know, burden that you bear to be a motorcyclist is to learn how to use a clutch lever.
He's asking you, Spurgeon. I would tell him to go learn how to rollerblade. I'm just kidding. I'm welcoming. I mean, I ride a scooter. I like twist and go. Sure. There's certainly a time and a place for it. I would be, if it's just some random person, not so much. If it's someone in my friend group, I would be a little disappointed. I'd be like, you're missing out. You're missing out on things that I think are important. I don't like the dumbing down of society to allow access. Like I do appreciate the fact that in order to do some things, you have to have developed a certain amount of skill. I think that's satisfying. Like,
that's what I struggle with. That's what I struggle with the most. It's the dumbing down. It's there's something cool. Part of what attracted me into wanting to learn how to ride a motorcycle is I wanted to learn a new skill. I wanted to know something that the average person didn't know how to do. It's the same reason I drive a manual transmission. One, because it's a theft deterrent. Very few people can steal my truck because they can't drive it. But like, there's something cool about learning how to use a clutch. That being said, I want more people to experience motorcycling. And if DCT transmissions and e-clutches and scooters are helping take away that barrier to entry, I'm not mad about that, but I am worried that riding a motorcycle isn't as easy as driving a car. You've got to pay attention, and part of that is learning how to control it. And I guess even if you take away a clutch, there's still a barrier entry of learning there.
So you feel like by requiring people to learn fewer things, you are suggesting that you can get by without knowing that stuff, and therefore not pay attention as much, and therefore be a sort of like less informed and less concerned and less capable rider.
My buddy's a surfer, and there's a surf spot in Southern California that's well known because you have to hike to it. It's a really good surf spot. And he was lamenting how the kids on their Super 73s and electric bikes now with surf racks are just like blowing the spot up. And it's like an intense wave. And it used to be like the people who were there because they were dedicated and skilled. And now there's just like everybody and their little cousin is there. And it's like kind of become a shit show. And so in some ways that analogy works for motorcycling, right? Like if you've suddenly like made it so easy to ride a 650cc bike that'll go 100 miles an hour in the blink of an eye, and yet they don't have, the person who's riding it doesn't have the fundamental skill because they didn't learn how to use a clutch on a Rebel 250 or a Ninja 400, then like I understand that. But I also still understand that everyone here on my screen very much wants more people to ride motorcycles so we can continue to be employed.
Yeah. Well, because I think we also appreciate it, but I think I have a similar story, I guess, not with surfing, but specifically with motorcycles, where when I was living in Nashville, I had a roommate who, God love him, he was adorable, but probably didn't have any place necessarily being on two wheels. And in the entire time that I was there, I had, two, if not more motorcycles in the garage. He never once asked to ride them. He never once said, "Oh, can I go hop on your Bonneville, your VFR or whatever?" I brought home a Metropolitan 50 scooter from Honda, and within like 30 seconds, he was like, "Oh, can I go ride that?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." Like, that's like, I would love for you to go try this out. And within a minute of him trying to ride it, he almost ate shit and crashed the thing. And so like, I think because there's almost this perception. At least it wasn't
650.
Yeah.
True. But it was almost like I can just hop on and go and not have to feel any of the steps necessary to like get on it. I don't know. That's my only concern, if that makes sense.
I think it's fascinating that we've come to this conversation about alternative transmissions and like barrier of entry and like, oh, can someone just get on and ride it and not totally understand it? This is kind of the same conversation that we could have about anti-lock brakes, right? Is it a bad idea for someone to only ever ride a bike that has ABS and not understand what the limits of the machine are? Because that's tough for me.
That's tough. That's
I like ABS.
You
it's
should,
good.
don't drive a car with airbags so that you won't get in accidents. It's like such a safety. It's such a safety feature. It's there for when stuff goes wrong. It's not there. It's like I said, I still use ABS. I consider myself a pretty adept braker, but like I still always rely on ABS on my ride home from work or riding on the street because it is such a valuable safety feature.
Right. I just don't see ABS isn't a barrier to entry, though. I think. Agreed. I think the transmission.
Okay. No. Fair enough. So you can probably tell where I'm going with this, but now let's talk about traction control. Are people less capable for having never had to understand that, or is it like perfectly fair for someone to go through their motorcycling life and never spin the rear tire? You don't have
lots
to
of people
enjoy
do
motorcycling, right? Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't need to. Like traction control is, in my mind, traction control. Other than the suspension, traction control as far as tires continuing to adhere to the pavement are concerned, it's the least important, least crucial safety feature or rider aid.
I think it's interesting because like where I typically find myself having this conversation is with new riders that say, I want to ride a motorcycle, but I can't afford a new motorcycle, and I'm looking at used motorcycles and they don't have ABS or they don't have traction control. Is it safe to start on a motorcycle that doesn't have ABS or traction control? And I think every single person here started on a motorcycle without ABS or traction control. And I think that's where I find the conversation, especially around traction control and ABS, to be the most interesting. Is that if you had somebody that came up to you and said, I really want to ride a motorcycle, but I'm looking at a 1996, Ninja 250. Should I learn how to ride on that? It's the only thing I can afford. My buddy has one. He's selling it for $500. Like it doesn't have ABS and it doesn't have traction control. But why are you saying that? Like, but why?
It doesn't go that fast. So like, you're probably not going to lock up the tires. It's got the manual clutch that I want everyone to know how to use. And it's not that fast. Like it's light. It's cheap. Like, yeah, it's been the iconic beginner bike other than the Rebel 250 since 1986, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So on the other end of that extreme, imagine this person that says like, I'm going to learn to ride a motorcycle. I don't know anything about it, but I took the test and I'm allowed to do it. So I'm doing it. And I'm going to go to the Honda dealership and I'm going to buy a Honda CBR 650R. And I'm just going to ride away from that dealership. And then that person rides that bike around for a while. They don't know how to use a clutch. They don't they don't know what ABS is or traction control is. They just know it's a motorcycle, and they ride around. They're starting to lean through corners. They're having fun. Maybe they take that bike to a track day. Absolutely take a CBR 650R to a track day. Our buddy Dustin wrote an article about that on Common Tread. Quick plug. And they are now like learning to lean over and like ride faster. And they've never learned how to use a clutch. They don't know anything about ABS or traction control or anything like that. They just have a motorcycle that does all these things for them.
And they just passed you on the track.
Yeah, exactly. And they just went blowing by you. So I'm inclined to both be sort of concerned and a little bit disappointed that like, don't you care about those things? But I'm also just like happy. And now that I've built this fake scenario in my head, I'm thinking that the person who does that, who takes that path and is like interested in going to a track day at all, if they don't know, if they've never known a life without ABS or without traction control, they're the type of person that's going to care to learn anyway. Yeah. So those systems are not going to inhibit them.
That's where my head is that like, if you have a person that, if you can get them into it and they can become passionate about it, my hope would be they're going to want to naturally learn how to be better at it. They're going to want to learn what these tools are, or maybe a little bit more of clutch finesse and things like that. So to that point, maybe having the barrier to entry removed in the beginning will help people. For the right person, I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah. It does. It boils down a lot to like personality and character too, and why they're approaching motorcycling in the first place.
Well, so speaking of personality and character, I'm going to challenge you guys with one thing here. We've talked about electronic rider aids to do with braking, acceleration, traction control, cruise control, that kind of thing, suspension, and alternative transmission style things, including automatic transmissions, quick shifters, slipper clutches, blah, blah, blah. I want you to rank them best to worst. Or if you had a motorcycle, which electronic rider aid would you choose first, and which one would you choose last within those 4 buckets of brakes, engine control, suspension, and transmission?
Ari, I'll let you go first. Guest honor.
Sure. I mean, easy first place is brakes. I'm a big believer in ABS. I think it's a super important safety feature that is a good backstop for anyone riding a motorcycle, because we will fall over if we lose traction. After that, personally, I would probably
come on, say the right answer. Say the right answer. You know what it is. Come on.
I mean, I'm torn. I think quick shifter. But then suspension, electronic suspension is just, like you said, we used the word luxury before, and it's such a luxury. It's so nice to have if it's the right kind of bike and it actually adjusts the range. And then like, I'm not really sweating a slipper clutch necessarily because I like my clutch finesse. And have I forgot anything else? Is there any?
Well, you ignored the engine control section, which has to do with traction control, cruise control, throttle maps.
Tells you how I feel about it.
Okay. So you would have electronic suspension before you had cruise control?
It's all, this is the same, like this is the part of the conversation where it's like, what bike are you going to be doing what with? And it depends what I'm doing. And like right now I'm just thinking about like commuting around Los Angeles and getting here and there. And like,
I'm just happy that transmission was number 2 on your list. That's what I wanted you to say.
I just love the quick shifter. I really do.
Spurjo, what about you?
I'm with Ari. Brakes are first, probably.
Yes.
Because especially with ABS, off-road brakes, things like that. I would say maybe like electronic cruise control or adjustable like traction control, like being able to turn traction control off or having electronic cruise control is probably 2.
So you would take that over a slipper clutch or a quick shifter or an automatic transmission of any kind. That would rank below for you.
Correct. And then suspension's not even on my list. I'm completely happy with a manual. As long as I can adjust my clickers, I don't need an electronic suspension.
Okay. All right. Interesting.
And and as far as like, slipper clutches I'm happy with a manual transmission. I don't need a slipper clutch. I don't need a quick shifter. Yeah. So okay. ABS,
two
engine
for 2
control.
with ABS. What do you say?
Yeah. Oh yeah. 3 for 3. The brakes. Yeah. That's the place where it's the most useful and arguably the most advanced and the most important. So yeah, brakes are first for me. I would go transmission number 2, same as you, Ari. I'm gonna go for a quick shifter or a slipper clutch, perhaps both if I can afford it. And then after that would be engine control, because I loves me some cruise control.
I like that you twirled you twirled your mustache while you.
It's a fancy thing, you know.
Sure.
It's very fancy.
Yeah, fancy. And then suspension would probably be last for me. It is a luxury. Ari's not wrong. It's
such a luxury.
Good suspension is so good.
But I think a luxury with suspension, and we're specifically talking about electronically adjustable suspension. I think it's a luxury, but I think I keep coming back to this, for so many people that have never touched the clickers or never adjusted, it takes the guesswork out of that. They can look at the little icons and they can say 1 people, 2 people, right. 3 people, 3 people with luggage, and they can just click the button and it does all the work for them. 3
people with luggage. What kind of motorcycle are you riding, dude?
Hey, when we were in India, how many people did you see on a motorcycle?
Yeah, I don't think those bikes have
electronically adjustable suspension.
But my point is, I think for the right person, electronically adjustable suspension could be a lot higher on the ranking here if they don't know what they're talking about. Or they don't know what they're doing.
And or if the priorities are different. Like Ari said, it depends on the type of riding you do, type of rider you are, blah, blah, blah.
Can I ask one final question before we say that we had a great time and we play the engine sound guessing game and all that jazz?
I'm having fun.
Of all of these electronic rider aids that we've talked about, which do you think, because we all agree that ABS was first in this, which one do we want? Which of these do you think would be best for helping new non-riders get comfortable with riding a motorcycle?
Oh, I mean, yeah, it's gonna be some sort of e-clutch system, right? Like something that keeps you from having to shift,
right? Yeah, whether like you said, whether it's the little scooter that's got a twist and go thing, or if it's a big bike with an automatic transmission of some or automatic clutch of some kind, it's got to be it, right?
Yeah. Doesn't make me happy to say that, but that's gonna make the barrier entry. I'll still say that the one I want most people to have is ABS. I want you to be able to panic brake safely.
Do we have time for one more question? Because we have one more written down, and I'm like, I am kind of curious and like,
go for
number 5, section 5.
Yeah, section 5. I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I don't have a good answer.
You are
for this. So the question we have written down so we won't keep you all in suspense is: have rider aids peaked, and how will they evolve? And this, I think, is a good question. Where do we go from here with some of these systems?
It's a great question.
I don't know. Does anybody have any ideas?
There's electronic suspension bikes that can bunny hop over curbs. That'd be pretty cool. That'd be a rider aid.
I mean, electronic suspension does have, the suspension is adaptive in so much as it reacts to things that happen to it. But it does occur to me that there could be suspension that they toyed around with this idea, I think, in cars and maybe even motorcycles years and years ago. And maybe I'm just not informed enough to know that if it exists now, but there is theoretically a suspension system that would be proactive, that could like read the road.
Yeah. And that stuff exists in the car world.
Yeah, does it?
So it's been discussed. I don't know if it's actually been implemented.
Right. So like you can imagine a motorcycle that if you go across a speed bump, it will just know the speed bump is there. And before the wheel hits the speed bump, or as the wheel hits the speed bump, completely just open the compression damping in the fork entirely and let the front wheel just come up without shocking your wrists at all.
I think so.
You also have like lane detection systems in cars where like it can read the paint, and
that's ultimately what we need to look at, right? Is the car world and what cars are doing, because that's what will trickle down to motorcycles eventually. And I guess I'm not sure how these systems advance.
I think it's interesting.
Yeah, where do we go from here?
There is an interview I was watching recently with Liam Gallagher, the lead singer of Oasis, and he was talking about how
he was talking about traction control.
He was talking about the customers of music. He's like, the fans, the people. He goes, they're idiots. He goes, if you go to your fans and you say, what album do you want me to write next? They're going to give you a horrible answer. You don't want to listen. You don't want to listen to those people. You give them what they want. You tell them what they want. He talked about the fashion industry. You talk about these high-end fashion houses. They don't go to the public and say, what would you like us to make next season? They tell the public, you know, what they're going to wear next season and what their haircut's going to be and all that jazz.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I think about this because I don't know what I want. If you would have asked me 5 years ago when I was riding around on my 1090, if I would have needed to be able to have my traction control adjustable to 9 different points of contact, I would have been like, no, I don't need that. Like I wouldn't even think to guess that. And now that I have it, I really like it. So
this is sort of like a cell phone with a touch screen, right? Was anyone asking for that? Was anyone like, oh, I'm desperate to have a phone in my pocket, a little computer and a screen that I can scroll with my finger? No one was asking for that.
You don't know you want it until someone creates it.
So
we
it's
were
a good point, Spurge.
T9ing with one thumb in our pocket, sending text messages when we should have been, paying attention in class.
Fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I struggle. I think this is maybe it's an interesting way to turn the tables, because we're often as motorcycle journalists or content creators or whatever slanderous term you want to use to describe us. We're trained to, and we try to be critical of motorcycles and motorcycling systems and motorcycling manufacturers and motorcycle design and all of that in the hopes that in the hopes that we will help there be a more informed motorcycling public. But like, when you ask me, what would I do? Well, I haven't had a lot of good ideas. And when I look at all these systems for like, anti-lock brakes that are lean angle sensitive and traction control that can, sense an increase in RPM and is judging that with wheel speed and all these systems, like, I don't know where I would take it. I really don't.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with Bridgestone engineer a number of years ago and asked them a similar question. I'm like, what's next with tires? Like, they're so good. And they said that what they're trying to figure out how to do is get them to integrate better with electronic rider aids like traction control and ABS. Like, basically get them to operate at the frequency that those systems can now manipulate traction, like make those things complement each other, which I thought was really interesting.
I wrote an article a couple of years ago about, tires are the original traction control, right? And I was with you guys recently down at Barber watching the difference in Zach's lap times between tires that weren't so good and tires that were really good. And like, he was riding a bike that did not have any electronic rider aids, but just the difference in tires allowed him to be faster and safer and feel more comfortable on the motorcycle. So it's crazy. It's crazy that we're having a conversation about like, where's it going to go next? And there's still motorcycles on the road in a large part that might just benefit from a better set of tires.
Yeah. True enough. Yeah. Yeah. It's, I wish I had more ideas. I wish I was like, you guys, what if they made a transmission that had 9 speeds? But like, truth is, I don't think I've been like usually pretty good with 6. As long
and
as
they did that before. They used to have bikes with a ton of extra gears.
Yeah. It's been tried. So maybe we're at a point with evolution. I'm curious. I mean, if anything, and I guess I'd put this to you guys too, have they gone too far is another question we could ask here. And I certainly have motorcycle. I mean, I was talking about that BMW R9T that I'm riding the new one now. And I gotta say, I'm like fondly looking back on the old one and thinking like, I don't think I needed I love cruise control, but I don't need it. I don't think the quick shifter helps it. I don't know if I need this stuff,
I guess my final thought on that issue is that like, I don't mind if they keep evolving the systems, if they keep trying to improve, as long as you can always turn them off. My only fear with how will it evolve
good distinction.
Is whether or not the government is going to get involved and say, no, like you have to have this. You can't turn it off. There's no way to override this. And so that's my only fear with it, is that if you are an experienced rider that can control a motorcycle almost better in some situations without having these rider aids on, just continue to allow us to disable them is probably the only fear that I would have.
You can always go to the fuse box, Spurgeon, and disable it yourself.
That's why you need Ari Henning as a friend. He can show you manually how to override these safety systems.
I put a switch in my 2012 Speed Triple R to turn ABS off specifically for one intersection on my way home from work.
Yeah, because it's been a long time yet that sometimes bikes are not adjustable in that way. That's funny. Yeah. Well,
any final thoughts from you guys?
I'm just going to say I'm thrilled to see that we don't have all the answers, because that just means we can have another podcast about this later, as far as I'm
keep talking about it.
Yeah, we're going to be employed forever at this point. Never something to stop talking about.
Well, what do you guys say we listen to a sound of a motorcycle starting up and see if we can guess what it is?
I like
that. That's always a nice humbling game to play.
Yeah. Have you had anyone who's just been like, that's just blowing your hair back with how immediately they identified what it was?
Well, Patrick Garvin, our colleague Patrick Garvin, has been on a couple times, and he is almost always brimming with confidence, but he's either spot on or way, way off. He's not consistent in his answering, but he's usually quite confident, which I appreciate.
I was probably the most confident I had ever been the last time that Zach and I played this, because producer Chase picked 2008 Triumph Bonneville.
That's a softball.
Yeah.
That's a softball for Spurjo. That's true.
Zach was throwing BMW Boxer Twins at me and trying to get me to guess otherwise.
Well, no, I said Norton Commando, and your confidence wavered. You were like, I don't know. Anyway,
well, we got a hint that threw us off. But yeah, so that's for those of you that have never played the engine sound guessing game with us before, maybe this is your first episode of Highside, Lowside. With each of our guests, we have a engine sound that was picked by our producer Chase. We do not know what the engine sound is, and together with you in the audience, we are going to play the engine sound. We're going to have 2 hints, and we're going to try and see which one of us can guess closest. And for those of you playing at home, you're the fourth member of the team right now.
Shout it out if you know it. Okay, let's do it.
Excuse me.
That was Ari sneezing. That
was
wasn't
not the engine sound. That was not the engine sound.
Guess
I'm not totally sure, but can I just say this right off the bat? I want to ride that bike. It sounds awfully sweet, doesn't it?
It does sound nice. It sounds like it's got a nice little purr to it, but then it also sounds like it revs up pretty quick and probably has some gusto.
Yeah.
I was listening to the starter. The starter's always like, how many what?
Yeah, that's true.
What did it tell you? What did the starter tell you?
It has 7 cylinders. The starter didn't tell me a lot on that one. I would be pretty confident in saying it has 2 cylinders, but I've been wrong before.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Sounded like a twin to me. Spurs, you learn anything that you can share with the class?
It sounded like, I was going to say twin. Sounds like it has a fuel pump starting up at the beginning there. There was a little bit of a fuel pump whine at the very beginning. So I'm guessing something a bit newer. I don't know if it was, I don't know if it sounded to me like it was spinning up as aggressively as maybe it sounded like it was spinning up to you guys. Maybe I'm wrong on that.
It's sometimes it can be tricky, right? The revving can sound like it's got like a real slow, like a heavy flywheel and sound kind of
vintage. That's what they're doing with the throttle,
Yeah.
right? They might not be wrapping it all the way open. I feel like whenever I'm doing this and I'm listening, it's very similar to something I struggle with my vocabulary, where I'm like, the word I want is just out there beyond the mists. And like, I know it's there and I can see the shape and I'm like, oh, but it's just, I'm like, I've heard that sound before. I know it's out there, but I'm really struggling to identify it. I can throw something at the wall and see if it sticks.
Go for it. Are you hearing a parallel twin? You're hearing a V-twin? Yeah, we can start there.
I was hearing, at first, I thought it was a Honda, like, parallel. Is the CT, no, the 1300, the CTX 1300 is a
V4.
V4. Okay, not that. I was thinking it was a modern, one of the more relaxed modern Ducati V-twins, like a Desert X.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Slip on.
I was thinking like Indian FTR.
Oh, that's a good guess.
Like liquid.
It does. The stroke sounds pretty loud.
Yeah.
It sounds pretty long. Excuse me. Like there's like kind of a long pause between power pulses.
Zach, did you have a guess before we give out hint number 1?
Yes. Do a hint. I want a hint. I need a hint. Come on, guys.
No, I got nothing.
But do you think it's a twin?
Oh yeah, I think it's a twin. I'm going to be really sad if it's a parallel twin because it sounds like a V to me. It definitely sounds like a V.
It could be a 270.
It could be a 270.
It could be a Tenere.
Yeah, it sounds
not a T7, a 1200.
It just sounded like a V twin to me. I want to believe it's.
Yeah.
I want to believe it's a V twin.
I want to believe it's a V twin too, and it's a pretty wide splay. It's like it's a 60 degree to 90 degree V twin. It's not a narrower V twin than that. That's all I've got.
All right, let's do a hint.
Let's do a hint, and then we will listen again. Hint number 1 for the audience and my fellow contestants as well. Hint number 1 is parallel twin.
What?
No.
That was my first instinct. Even though I applied it to the wrong motorcycle, it's got a V4.
It's a parallel twin. I'm gonna go.
Let's take one more listen. Let's take one more listen.
Yeah, you're right. One more listen. I like it.
It is not a 180-degree parallel twin.
Could you imagine if producer Chase gave us a 2008 Triumph Bonneville again, and I was like just missing it this time because I wasn't thinking that? I'd be so mad at myself.
The D-cell, when it comes off the throttle, how like lazily it kind of returns to idle.
Yeah, it's got long overrun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a hot rod engine. It's a relaxed engine. It almost makes me think cruiser.
That's where my head, that's why, yeah.
Yeah,
parallel twin cruiser with a real lopey.
What about like a Thruxton?
A Thunderbird?
So that was one of my, I have two guesses. One is a Triumph Thunderbird, which is a big, like, isn't it like a 1500,
1600, and I think they did a 1700 version too. Like it's a big.
So it's a
and is that a 270 crank?
That I don't know, but the Thruxton wasn't. The Thruxton was a 360 crank, and they only because they did the original. The Thruxton and the T100s were 360 cranks. The Scramblers and the those original Speedmasters were all 270 cranks.
Yeah,
but I don't
they're all
think
270s now.
Are they all 270s now? Okay.
I think they're all 270s now.
Okay. I think we need another
hint. Sure. My other guess is Yamaha TDM 850.
Oh, wow.
Was it an 850?
Getting obscure, man.
A TDM? I don't know what that is. What is that?
It's like an early 90s kind of sport. Yeah, kind of like a like sport touring, sort of like a Kawasaki Versus kind of upright sport touring where it's like Triumph Sprint style thing. And I think it was a 270 crank parallel twin, but it was a big engine.
There was a
like
feature on a TDM in that Cycle World we were looking at that had the article about my dad in it that we brought.
Oh, really? So did
Southeast.
it like incepted? Like
I think it was just in there, man. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We need another hint, Spurge. Help us. Oh my gosh.
Hint number 2 / final hint. Touted by manufacturers, or touted by the manufacturer as quote unquote 6 decades of cruiser DNA distilled.
Oh, that's a great hint. That's so obscure and weird, but it's so packed with
6 decades of cruiser DNA distilled.
That makes me not think Triumph, even though Triumph has the lineage. They've been around for ages because they didn't do cruisers. Like they had bikes that nowadays you'd be like, oh, that was kind of a cruiser. But back in the day, they were considered street bikes.
Yeah, but I could see Triumph being like,
we've been doing it since the beginning. Yeah, we've been doing it since before Harley. Are you kidding me?
This is like when Harley said that Harley released a Pan America saying that their lineage has been off road because their first motorcycle was in like
wasn't pavement. And okay, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Triumph Thunderbird.
Okay, so
guess.
Okay, so Thunderbird's a decent guess. Other motorcycle manufacturers that have been making motorcycles.
Who else is
that make a parallel twin cruiser?
It's certainly not a Kawasaki Vulcan, that's for sure.
I mean, it could be Kawasaki has that parallel twin 650.
Yeah, but that's a 180 crank. That wouldn't sound like this,
would it? Wouldn't sound like that. That's a good point.
Yeah. Ugh, you guys.
Honda
what are we not thinking of?
Honda doesn't have a parallel twin cruiser, do they?
I just have a big blank spot where Honda's
no, they do. There's a Rebel 500. There's a parallel twin.
That's not a Rebel 500.
No, it's a 180 crank. Yeah.
Because they had the flat 6, they had a V twin.
It's a Valkyrie.
Kawasaki had like the old Kawasaki parallel twins, but they were like that was like the 454.
Yeah.
And how could that be 6 decades of?
I think it's got to be Triumph, guys. Who are we missing? Yamaha? Does Yamaha have anything?
What if this was a Harley Davidson Street 750?
No, that was a V.
That's a V twin.
Was it? I thought that was okay.
I like it. I like it when these engine and guessing game become collaborative. When we're all so stumped that we're like really just we're paddling in the same direction. I don't know what else. Like what other manufacturers? Okay, it's not Ducati. I can't think of a Yamaha. I can't think of a Honda. It's like the parallel twin really helps narrow it down. It's got to be a Triumph.
That's the only thing I think of. The Thunderbird. Because it makes me because I'm trying to think when the Thunderbird was released. Keep in mind they had the Speedmaster and they had the America already, and they were the smaller 865s. And I remember when Triumph introduced that bike, they talked about the fact that like people had been trying to make a big bore parallel twin for like 50, 60 years, but they couldn't do it
for 60 decades, perhaps.
For just it shook too much. And how they were able to figure out the counterbalancers to create this large bore parallel twin. So Zach, I think you were the first one to say Thunderbird, were you not?
No, you said that. I mean, I thought it before you said it, so it is definitely my idea. But
all right, well, let's see. Any other last minute guesses, or we think we're good to?
I got nothing. I'm tapped.
Yeah,
we're all wrong. What? So the correct answer is a 2024 Royal Enfield Super Meteor.
You know what's funny? I almost said
that sound. If you're listening and not watching, is Ari Henning beating his head against the desk
with a RevZilla cutting board that someone came in the back garage door and gave to us several months ago.
Yeah. I just walked in and was like, I made this for you guys.
That's awesome.
I use it as a clipboard.
I love that.
I'm so disappointed in us for forgetting Royal Enfield.
I should have said it out loud.
They're right there in the same lane as Triumph.
I did think of the Royal Enfield Interceptor 650 or the 650 engine.
Are those 270s?
Yeah, the 270 crank. Yeah, absolutely. And this nice Lopey engine. And that crossed my mind, but the whole 6 decades of cruiser DNA, I'm like, that's
marketing, buddy.
Yeah,
that's hyperbole.
It's marketing. I know.
For those of you listening, a few years ago, Royal Enfield introduced a Meteor 350, which was a little single cylinder 350. Zach and I talked about that recently on the episode with Lance. But recently, within the last year or two, they introduced a bigger version, a parallel twin 650 version. So a middleweight cruiser, and that is a 2024 Royal Enfield Super Meteor.
I'm not gonna be able to sleep tonight, guys.
That's the same engine that's in the other 650s, right? The INT 650 and the Continental.
Well, let's give a shout out to Ryan. Ryan, thank you for sending in a sound clip of your motorcycle. You are robbing sleep from Ari Henning this evening. Ryan's bike is a stock engine. The intake snorkel has been removed, and Ryan has a Rhino Racing exhaust without baffles installed on his motorcycle.
Okay.
Yeah, well, that was a good one.
I stand by my first comment. It's a sweet sounding engine, and I like that engine a lot, and I would like to ride that bike.
Well, there we go. Yeah. But we're all wrong. We're all losers today.
Yeah, we all lose today.
Hopefully somebody in the audience was better at it than we were.
If you got it right, please send an email to Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com. We will not believe you, but you can claim that you were right.
Let us know that you're smarter than we are.
Exactly. All right. Well, we've probably taken up enough of your day, Ari Henning. You could probably get back to educating the world with your shop manual scripts or whatever the heck it is you were going to do with the rest of your day.
I was going to eat lunch because I forgot to do that before we started doing this. But yeah, it was fun, guys. It's always a blast. I appreciate you having me on.
All right, Ari, thank you for joining us. For those of you that are going to hang out, we are now moving on to the t-shirt winner of the day.
Can't believe I didn't say Royal Enfield out loud. You always got to just like say it out loud. If you think it, just say it out loud. Because if you don't say it out loud, you're not going to get any credit for it later. You're not going to get any credit for bringing anything up.
Listen, if you thought about it, I'll give you credit right now. I didn't even think about it. No,
you can't do that, because anyone who emails Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com and says, I knew it was a Royal Enfield Meteor 650, we're going to say, bull crap, you did. Yeah. And that's what you should say to me right now. Say it. I need you to say it.
I trust you.
Say it.
Please say it. I can't.
Okay.
I can't do it.
Too good a friend.
You're too honest. I'm not a good friend. I just know that you're honest. You would never lie to me because you're too good of a friend. All right. Either way, that was a rousing engine sound guessing game. And I very much enjoyed it. I probably could have kept waxing poetic with the two of you for quite a while.
That was fun. Let's move on, shall we, to the t-shirt winner of the day. I like this one a lot. This is a lot of fun. As a friendly reminder, you can win a t-shirt by listening to Highside, Lowside, and then submitting an Apple Podcast review. We go in, we check out the reviews. We look for ones that are funny, informative, or interesting in some way. We pick it out, we read it on the air, and then that person has access to one, sometimes two, free t-shirt 'S.
Well, today's podcast review, short and sweet, but made us both laugh. This came in from Slappa Alpaca. Slappa Alpaca said, one has the looks, the other has the wit, and together they make one fully functional brain. And I love them for it. Well, this is great. I assume Zach has the looks and I have the wit. But
that's funny. I assumed you had the looks. I think it's funny. We both assumed that we had the wit. That says a lot about our personalities, I think. Anyway, this review made us chuckle. As we said, thank you, Slap Alpaca, for taking the time to make us question our own looks and wits. Slap Alpaca, if you're out there, please do send your preferred t-shirt size and your preferred mailing address to Highside Lowside at RevZilla.com, and we'll send you some swag.
All right. So moving along to the Highside Lowside comment. Anytime you have a thought for us, you have a topic, you have an idea, sometimes you just want to get something off your chest, you disagree with us, you agree with us, or you just don't have anybody else to talk to, you can always send us an email to highsidelowside at RevZilla.com like Matthew has. Zach, what did Matthew have to say?
Or maybe you have a question like Matthew has, and your friends are idiots. I get it. My friends are idiots too.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Wait a second. That's that Matthew. Quick wit. Oh, no.
No. Matthew sent us an email that said, I just got my first motorcycle at the young age of 44, a gently used Harley Davidson Sportster 883, a classic. Matthew says, I live about an hour away from New Jersey Motorsports Park and would really like to try out the racetrack. My Sportster is not exactly a track machine, but I don't care what I look like. My question is this: will having a slow bike with crappy lean angle negate any benefit of learning to ride on a track, or should I just go and have fun? Next season, I plan to move up to a different platform. I'm looking at a Yamaha XSR 900, but I think it would be fun to ride my slow bike at a racetrack and get some experience before this season gets too cold. Well, it's almost December, so it might be too late. Sorry, Matthew. What do you guys think? Should I track the Harley Sportster or wait for the Yamaha XSR? Spurgeon, what do you say to Matthew?
Come on. I think there's only one answer here. Matthew, take it to the track. I will say, having done track days at NJMP, for those of you that are, Zach gave the full name, it's New Jersey Motorsports Park. There's actually two tracks there. There's Lightning and there's Thunderbolt. Okay. Lightning is, I would say, a little bit less fun. It's just longer straightaways, more sweeping corners. Whereas I think Thunderbolt probably has a little bit more technicality to it. And I would just say, Matthew, make sure you do Thunderbolt, because I think Thunderbolt will be a more fun track for you, even on a Harley Davidson Sportster. Zach, what do you think? Do you have a dissenting opinion?
Here's what I'm grappling with. If Matthew goes to the track and has fun on the Sportster and is like, this is cool. I got a kick out of this. I should take my XSR here. Then I'd be like, yeah, you bring your XSR. You obviously like it. If Matthew went to the track and was like, that wasn't really that much fun, I don't think I want to do track days anymore, I would still say take the XSR there because maybe the reason that you didn't like it was that the bike wasn't quite appropriate. I agree with Spurge. I say take it to your track day. Take the Harley to a track day. See what you think. It's going to be fun to hold it wide open going down the straightaway and, go faster than you might feel comfortable or should legally on a public road. And the Harley Sportster 883 has truly limited cornering clearance, and you're going to scrape the pegs immediately and you're going to want to lean over more, I think. But I still think you'll get a kick out of it. And I agree with Spurge that you should go for it.
So Matthew, I'm going to leave you and my co-host Zach with this recommendation. Head over to RevZilla.com/commentread and look up an article titled Riding a Harley at Keith Code's California Superbike School. This is an article from Panhead Jim, who is a contributor for us in the early days of Common Tread. This article dates back to March 9th of 2015, so it's an older article. But in this article, Jim takes a Harley Davidson to California Superbike School, and the final conclusion of his article is this. I had a good time. I left the track a better rider than when I started the day, And that was really the goal of California Superbike School. I didn't set any new track records, but I had a good time. And I would like to think that I earned the respect of other riders and made them realize that a Harley Davidson, can make for a fun motorcycle without really missing the mark on a full track experience.
Yeah, interesting.
So there you go.
I think that's good advice. I think there's more experience is basically always better, I think.
And I think Matthew has a positive, he recognizes that he's not going to go out there and win any lap times.
Yeah.
But
expectations are important here.
Like, he just wants to try it. He wants to have fun. And I think, Matthew, as long as you get out there, and if you're scraping your pegs, then maybe you got to figure out some body positioning techniques to get your body over a little bit more so you can lean a little bit less, and you'll figure it out. But I think you should give it a try.
So it's now my turn to leave the audience and my co-host with something, which is that there's another article on Common Tread somewhere. I can't find the title of it right now. Sorry. But our buddy Lance Oliver, he went to a specific track day for non-sport bikes. So there are in some places, some tracks and some organizations and some places in the country, there are track days available for motorcycles that are not sport bikes. So if you have an adventure bike or a cruiser or a touring bike, you can take it there and ride around and try to learn some things and have some fun, without the pressure of being I'm surrounded by Kawasaki Ninjas and Ducatis and stuff like that. And I thought that was kind of funny. So just a little seed of something there that you might be able to find a track day that's not all sport bikes.
The article is titled "Advanced Street Rider Training Breaks Down the Obstacles to Getting Instruction, Getting on Track." And it is from Lance Oliver, August 24th, 2023. And there's the hero image is of a Harley full fairing touring bike on a racetrack.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay. Well, good luck, Matthew. Keep us posted how it goes. And if you missed the window for this year, then enjoy the track day on the XSR. That's also going to be fun.
All right. Well, either way, we're happy that you are getting out and furthering your motorcycling experience, Matthew. And hopefully you're relying a little bit on clutch control and, all some of the other things that we talked about on today's episode. Speaking of which, we have come to the end of today's episode. Hopefully you've left us a comment on YouTube if you're watching it there, or if you're listening on Spotify or Apple or any of the other podcasting apps. You can always send us an email over to highside@RevZilla.com. Please make sure to share the podcast with your friends. It is the easiest way to help us get a little bit more exposure. If you like what Zach and I do, please just, maybe pass it along to a friend that that likes motorcycling. Or maybe they don't like motorcycling, but they're interested in motorcycling. This could be an episode to help them get them over the edge. Maybe they're thinking clutch, too much of a hurdle. But now that I know that there's automatic transmissions out there, maybe I want to go ride a motorcycle.
Right. Just fast forward to 1 hour, 37 minutes into this podcast when we talked about automatic transmissions, because the other stuff might make them glaze over a little bit. Anyway,
what'd you learn today, Zach? Anything that you took away that you weren't expecting to take away?
Big takeaway. I gotta say, the big takeaway here for me is that I didn't have more ideas for how to make electronic rider aids better or advanced. I thought when we put that question to the group, I thought it might spawn a conversation about what we need is 2 different brake levers, one for the front, one for the back. I'm tired of using a foot pedal. I don't know, some sort of idea that was outside the box, but we didn't, I think it says a lot about the advancement of motorcycling that we're in a pretty advanced place. I think. I don't know. I was surprised we didn't have more ideas when it came to that, I guess. What about you?
I was surprised. I think my final takeaway was I was surprised that there wasn't more disdain for certain rider aids.
Interesting. Okay.
I feel like, to your point, we've come to a pretty good spot in motorcycling. We can turn all this crap off if we don't want it. But
right.
all this crap, while it's turned on, it helps to make the bikes a little bit more approachable, a little bit easier to ride. Do I really, in my heart of hearts, want everyone to learn how to use a clutch? I do. But does it matter? It really doesn't. If you go get a DCT Honda or an E-clutch Honda or one of these new, auto transmission BMWs or KTMs, and you can go out and you can have a good time on 2 wheels and you're not missing anything. Does it matter? Probably not.
Yeah. Okay.
Probably not.
Well, I appreciate that perspective. You are yourself an honest man and podcast host. Spurgeon. I appreciate that.
That's that wit coming through again.
Well, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see Spurgeon's good looks. And if you're not, you can find them anytime you like. In the meantime, as Spurge said, share the pod, please, and leave comments. Send us some mail if you like. We appreciate you listening. And I think that's it, Spurge?
Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. Hopefully you learned something, or at least hopefully you laughed at least once or twice. That's all we can ask for.
Right.
But until next time, adios.
See you, everybody.